Madam Deputy Speaker.
Let us pray. Almighty God, where you have called us to govern this province, we ask your help to make decisions and laws that will be just and will promote the interests of our people. Almagtige God, ons bid dat u gedurende ons vergaderings ons die nodigheid wysheid sal gee en ons motiewe suiwer sal hou en dat u ons sal help om ons tekortkominge te oorkom en al ons besluite aan u op te dra. Sikelele eliswe letu nabantu balo omasile ukulungu kipondo letu. Nkosi sikelele i Afrika klina bantwana bayo kokela inkokeli zayo yenike ukolo i Afrika. All this we beg in your holy name. Amen. You may be seated. Order. Good afternoon, honourable members and guests here at this virtual hybrid model for the sitting of the House here today. We have honourable members and the Premier here in the chamber with the presiding officers and the table staff. I trust that everybody has been connected to participate in the sitting of the Western Cape Provincial Parliament in terms of Rule 1A of the standing rules with all our members that have the necessary electronic means. I would also just like to highlight some key points, and one is that we have a quorum here today as provided for in the Constitution and the standing rules. Members here, both here in the chamber and on Microsoft Teams, have all the privileges and immunities imparted by law. The members are also requested to please ensure that we are adequately socially distanced, which I can see, and I thank the parliamentary staff for making sure that happens in the House. And then just to state that we are also offering language translation services, which are available both in the chamber as per normal and on Microsoft Teams via their respective channels. It does require that you use a second device or your cell phone, and if you have earphones available, to please use that. And then just finally, as ruled by the presiding officer in the sitting of the House on 23 April 2020, no interjection shall be permitted during the debate. In this regard, I'd also like to draw the attention of the honourable members to Rule 40 of our standing rules. I recognise the Chief Whip.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I move the motion as printed on the order paper in my name.
Are there any objections? No objections. agree to. I will now ask the Secretary to read the first order of the day.
Consideration of principle of the Western Cape Second Adjustment Appropriation Bill B7 2020.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I recognize the Honourable Minister Mania.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. 2 weeks ago, as we all know, the Minister of Finance, Tito Mboweni, delivered his medium-term budget policy statement in which he introduced a beautiful poem, The Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, to suggest that we have been blown off course by a mighty storm in South Africa. To quote, "And now the storm blast came, and he was tyrannous and strong. He struck his overtaking wings and chased us south along." Now, I'm no poet, Deputy Speaker, but one must question whether the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner was the most appropriate poem under the circumstances, because in the end, the Ancient Mariner shot the only symbol of hope, an albatross, and his ship sunk. Let us not forget the fate of the ship in the rhyme of the Ancient Warrior. To quote, "Under the water it rumbled on, still louder and more dread. It reached the ship, it split the bay, the ship went down like lead." Deputy Speaker, the fact is that we were not blown off course, but steered off course by a national cabinet who are the very opposite of what the minister claims, almost comically, and I quote, "facing peril with a strong sense of direction, steadfastness, resolution, and determination." Now, no one in their right mind could possibly think of the national cabinet as steadfast, resolute, and determined. The fact is that the national cabinet behave more like wasps in a jar and are responsible for steering us off course towards fiscal doom, which is why we are in deep economic trouble with stagnant economic growth, stunning revenue shortfalls, exploding budget deficits, and staggering national debt. To illustrate the point, national government borrowed a staggering 2.98 trillion rand over the past 10 years between 2010-11 and 2020-21. And all national government have to show for it is stagnant economic growth with a 7.8% contraction this year, but more importantly preceded by a 0.2% growth in 2019-20 and a staggering 11 million people unemployed in South Africa. Which is why the sovereign credit rating agencies, who do not play by the Queensbee rules, of course, switched to rapid fire last week and downgraded our sovereign credit rating to deep junk status. When it comes to sovereign credit ratings, we now hover precariously just above, wait for it, Bosnia, Iraq, and Ghana. We are the opposite of Bill Clinton's famous saying, "It's the economy, stupid."
Order.
Because here it is the politics, stupid. And nothing illustrates the point better than the 10.5 billion rand, which will be spent bailing out zombie state-owned national airline South African Airways. The fact is that when it comes to a choice between spending 30 million rand on maintaining and developing healthcare services at our hospitals, or spending 30 million rand on bailing out South African Airways, the main opposition choose to spend 30 million rand on bailing out South African Airways. The fact is that when it comes to a choice between spending 11.5 million rand on clinical training and supervision of our health science trainees and the increased capacity of our healthcare workforce, or spending 11.5 million rand on bailing out South African Airways, the main opposition choose to bail out South African Airways. The fact is that when it comes to a choice between spending R1 million providing effective agricultural support to smallholder and black commercial farmers, promoting and facilitating agricultural development by targeting beneficiaries of land reform, restitution, and redistribution, or spending R1 million on bailing out South African Airways, guess what? Guess what? The main opposition choose to spend R1 million bailing out South African Airways. The fact is that when it comes to a choice between spending 492,000 Rand on reducing poverty and supporting food security, or spending 492,000 Rand on bailing out South African Airways, the opposition choose again, wait for it, to spend 492,000 Rand on bailing out South African Airways. It is simply wrong. And we must not forget that the municipal budgets were also slashed by 80.3 million Rand in our province in this financial year to fund the bailout of South African Airways. Which is why we should all congratulate the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Finance, Economic Development and Tourism, the Honourable Deirdre Bartman, for summoning the Minister of Public Enterprises, Pravin Gordhan, who for some reason is clinging on for dear life to the national airline to come and defend the indefensible right here in the provincial parliament in the Western Cape. All this means, Deputy Speaker, that the provincial budget will be cut after adjustments, of course, for provincial equitable share formula data updates by a massive 2.5 billion Rand over the medium term between 2021-22 and 2023-24 in the Western Cape. We are not going down without a fight. And at least with the 2.39 billion Rand in-year budget cut for compensation of employees is concerned, we have lodged an objection in terms of Section 79 of the Constitution to the Second Division of Revenue Amendment Bill 2020. In a letter to President Cyril Ramaphosa dated 27 November 2020, we drew his attention to our concerns that if brought into law, the bill will, and I quote, infringe on the ability of the provinces to comply with their current contractual and legal obligations to all their employees and will impact on provincial revenue allocations in an unlawful and unconstitutional manner. We will hence have no option but to seek legal redress in this regard, impacting as it will on our capacity to service existing collective agreements, deliver services, and continue to perform as a functional organ of state. We cannot be expected, put simply, to cough up 2.39 billion Rand that we do not have in the Western Cape. But despite the drastic budget cuts, we have mobilized a combined 1.4 billion Rand support package for jobs, for safety, for well-being in this financial year so that we can bounce back in the Western Cape, which includes an allocation of an additional 155.9 million Rand to support small businesses by accelerating the maintenance and repair of infrastructure at schools, which includes an allocation of an additional 12 million Rand to support small businesses, which have been hard hit by the COVID-19 pandemic, which includes an additional 80.5 million Rand to support businesses in the wine industry, which have been hard hit by the COVID-19 pandemic, which includes an allocation of an additional 36.5 million Rand to keep our children safe by accelerating the fencing of schools, which includes an allocation of additional 20 million Rand to appoint young people as safety ambassadors to drive violence prevention interventions, which includes an allocation of 15 million Rand to improve the collection of data at emergency centers to support evidence-based violence prevention, and which includes an allocation of 4 million rand to appoint young people to support the development of literacy and of numeracy at early childhood development centres in the Western Cape. Of course, with the resurgence of COVID-19 infections, we have also 227 million rand earmarked and available on the Health Department's budget, 200 million rand earmarked and available on the Transport and Public Works Department's budget, and 864 million rand available in the provincial reserves, all of which is available to fight the resurgence of COVID-19 infections in the Western Cape. And Deputy Speaker, we have done this because, of course, when people have jobs, people have dignity, and when people have dignity, people have hope. Because when people are safe, people have dignity, and when people have dignity, people have hope. And finally, because when people are empowered, people have dignity, and when people have dignity, people have hope in the Western Cape. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister. I now recognise Honourable Minister Madikizela.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker, Honourable Premier, Cabinet colleagues, Leader of the Opposition, and all the members of the Western Cape Legislature. Deputy Speaker, in his speech last week and today, the Minister of Finance and Economic Opportunities made it abundantly clear just how much trouble South Africa is in economically. The subheadings used by Minister Menir last week and today tell the broad brush story of the national economy clearly under severe stress. Heading like debt crisis, which Mr. Deputy Speaker will be approaching over 80% next year, bailouts, budget cuts, and wage war. And I can't emphasize enough, Deputy Speaker, the impact, the devastating impact these budget cuts will have on frontline services and service delivery in our province. Because 2.5 billion rands is not a small change. And of course, we know that with the wage war that is coming between government and the unions, the country will be brought to a standstill. And of course, because you judge a person by his track record, not by what he's promising to do, we've seen the rating agencies downgrading South Africa, as the minister said. Because, Deputy Speaker, despite the optimism that South Africa had just under 34 months ago, when President Ramaphosa stood in Parliament on the 18th of February 2018 and delivered a speech that gave many South Africans hope. In fact, since he took over the country, things have been going in a different direction. The situation has become worse under his leadership. Now, all these headings are not telling a positive story about South Africa. They are also not headings which describe a situation which can be blamed to any significant extent of the pandemic only. Even the additional budget for COVID-19 virus real costs would have been more manageable without the rampant corruption, poor policy decisions, and at times incoherent communication which have come to characterize the South African government. However, Deputy Speaker, these headings do tell us that the national ANC government cannot be trusted with running the economy of South Africa. And of course, we are worried, not only as the Western Cape, but as also as a country, Deputy Speaker. We are seeing the resurgence in COVID-19 cases. We are aware that the national government would want to introduce the lockdown again, which is really not helping. I think it is worth reminding the members of this House, Deputy Speaker, that the intention for the lockdown was to prepare the country in case we get overwhelmed in terms of the health infrastructure. And I must also remind the members of this House that in June this year, when the Western Cape was experiencing high numbers of COVID-19 cases, we were visited by President Ramaphosa, who promised to fund the COVID-19 for the Western Cape. And up until today, that promise was never fulfilled. But that is how we've come to know President Ramaphosa. He's not the man of his word. If ever a struggling, increasingly discredited government was presented through the outbreak of the pandemic with an opportunity to re-establish itself, it was the national government of South Africa. If ever a government used the opportunity to demonstrate just how fatally flawed and ill-equipped it is to govern a modern state, it is the ANC national government. Deputy Speaker, one of the more symbolic and economically damaging areas of South African national government activity is its ill-advised approach to the use and management of a wide range of state-owned enterprises and agencies of various kinds falling under the control of the different state ministries. Although as a result of disastrous governance issues and crippling financial challenges, the most obvious example of these are probably South African Airways, and I think Minister Maynard spoke a lot about what is happening there, and the bailout which was given to SAA, Eskom, PRASA, and many more. And also we have our own in the National Department of Transport. There are entities that are just financial gobblers. And 12 of those entities, I think it's only one that is functioning properly, Deputy Speaker. So all this is an indication of a government that has lost its direction. And that is why, Deputy Speaker, the rating agencies had no choice but to downgrade South Africa, because they can see that there is no policy direction and there's no leadership under this government. Deputy Speaker, in his special address to this House on the 22nd of October, the Premier stated the intention that the province will establish a single transport authority for the Greater Cape Town region. This will be a single provincial public transport operating entity to consolidate public transport operation functions and enable improved integration and management of public transport in the Western Cape across jurisdictions, modes, and functions. The entity will be responsible for the performance of existing provincial public transport operational functions and the joint performance and existence of municipal public transport operation functions in agreement with participating municipalities as expressly provided for in the National Land Transport Act. The functions will include the operational management of road-based public transport, bus, minibus, taxi, and if assignment proceeds, it will also include rail. The entity will also be responsible for public transport systems, including integrated monitoring, ticketing, and information systems. And Deputy Speaker, the members of this House are aware that we recently held a national taxi lekgotla to formalize this industry, because we have seen a number of challenges that are facing this industry that are contributing negatively to our economy. And in our own province in the Western Cape, this national lekgotla was preceded by our own provincial lekgotla, where we outlined the approach that we want to take as the provincial government of the Western Cape to formalize the taxi industry, because this is a very important industry for us, carrying more than 50% of the passengers in the entire Western Cape, and it is in our interest to see this industry formalized. And of course, we remain concerned with the violence that is happening in this industry, and we made it very clear that the conditions for us to be able to partner meaningfully with the industry is to make sure that there's peace. Municipalities will retain their planning functions and the entity will take direction from these plans. As we know, that the municipalities play a very important role as planning authorities when it comes to the public transport. Planning integration needs to occur through the establishment of appropriate institutional structures across some of the key jurisdictional boundaries. In addition, the entity will provide for the full participation of the city and local municipalities as substantial stakeholders and decision makers. In line with the province's mandate to coordinate between municipalities, the entity will work to improve public transport integration across the province through operational coordination with participating municipalities. This will necessarily require the establishment of the new coordination structures to enable regular engagement and alignment on operational issues. Deputy Speaker, this will also help us as the provincial government to coordinate the functioning of the public transport, particularly rail, because the failures of PRASA are really affecting the poorest of the poor, of the people of the Western Cape. That is why it is so important for us to get this right. The Western Cape government is not embarking on these actions concerning public transport lightly or without considerable analysis of the situation. I am sure that we will enjoy the support of all people and organizations with an interest in the legitimate needs of our community residents and visitors. And of course, we will be taking...
Finish off, Minister.
We will be taking advantage of what the President Ramaphosa said, where the private sector can now partner with government to fix public transport. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister. I now recognise Honourable Dugmore.
Thank you very much.
Can't hear, Speaker.
1 minute, Honourable Dugmore, if you just take your seat. Is there a point of order? Did I hear something?
Speaker.
Thank you. We're going to just, can I ask that Honourable Dugmore, we restart the clocks, please? Obviously, the microphone was not on. Honourable Dugmore, would you please care to restart your speech?
Okay, just 1 second. I'll be with you now. I'm also just... Right. Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Apologies for that. Deputy Speaker, Honourable Premier, members of the House and fellow South Africans. On this World AIDS Day, the 1st of December, we as the ANC once again pledge to work with all of those who live positively with HIV to defeat discrimination and to ensure that all those who test HIV positive, like those who test positive for COVID-19, have access to affordable and quality health care. As per our President and in his weekly briefing, we should acknowledge that over the last decade, the number of new infections, of HIV infections, has decreased by over 60%, a significant achievement by the ANC-led government and the people of our country. The President has also pointed to the fact that unequal relations between men and women contribute not only to gender-based violence, but also to the prevalence of HIV. And it was interesting, Deputy Speaker, that the silence from MEC Mainir was deafening. Not a word about gender-based violence and how this budget is going to address those particular issues. Deputy Speaker, over a decade of DA perpetuation of past privileges, it is cold comfort to now hear that they suddenly believe in our people's dignity and that they plan on giving people hope. In fact, I would appeal to MEC Mainir and his department to look at the PERO as well as the MERO, which have in fact informed these budgets, because they are fatally flawed. Nowhere in the Provincial Economic Review and Outlook or the Municipal Economic Review and Outlook do we actually look at the state of our economy when it comes to ownership. It's one thing, and we also agree that a job gives dignity, but greater dignity and greater hope is when people actually participate in the ownership of the economy. And every year that the PERO and MERO fails to even address the issue of the lack of transformation in tourism and in other sectors of our economy. We are failing to give dignity and hope. Oh, and after a decade of DA prioritizing only clean audits over service delivery, it is ironic that this DA provincial government wants to now recognize people's dignity and give them hope. But as the ANC Deputy Speaker, we remain unconvinced that the DA actually does care about everyone's dignity and that they are prepared to give everyone hope. Rather than actively support black commercial farmers, and by black I mean African, coloured and Indian, or supporting genuine food security by allowing small-scale farmers to secure leases from municipalities or sports facilities where they are actually needed, this provincial government does what it only knows what is best to do, and that is to criticize, to blame and complain. The politics of Helen Zille and her cabal, unfortunately, Deputy Speaker, live on. And another example on that was the dispute which has been declared by the Premier and MEC Maynard as opposed to finding a constructive solution. And if they are not criticizing, then they are spending 15 million rands to, in quotes, improve the collection of data. In his address to this House on the 22nd of October, the Honourable Premier said, the Western Cape government's budgets over the medium term are likely to be cut by the same amount or more than is now going to be funneled into the black hole, which is SAA, end of quote. But just last week, we got the true picture from National Treasury, and the cuts of the Western Cape budget is nowhere near the same amount or more as the Premier indicated. If any, Speaker, the Premier misled the House. Let us be clear, Speaker, that with a drop in national revenue, it is obvious that there will be cuts in budgets, and all provinces are affected by cost of employee amounts. All provinces are affected, but if one looks at the actual allocations in regard to the equitable share, it's clear that what the Premier did, which is try and create alarm, try and create panic, such as MEC Maynard is trying to do with his Section 79 approach, it's not actually based on fact. This DA-led administration is about criticizing and certainly not about recognizing the dignity of our people, and have certainly not given our people hope for the last decade. The DA administration is quick to blame national government for cuts, but is slow to recognize what national government will be doing for the province as well. So as much as there were cuts, MEC Maynard through the Deputy Speaker, in regard to the equitable share, there were massive amounts, over 1.5 billion, in conditional grants for mass public employment, in the ECD sector, in education, but you are silent about those issues because it's simply cheap and really kindergarten politics not to actually acknowledge this budget in its fullest sense. The MEC, Deputy Speaker, completely omitted to mention the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan as announced by President Ramaphosa. And for the sake of this House, allow me to remind the Honourable Maynard of the key pillars of this Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan. If you even just attempted to align us and see the advantages and not try and be clever, in inverted commas, or smart, we would get a lot more done. The President talked about aggressive infrastructure development. He talked about employment-orientated strategic localization, reindustrialization and export promotion, energy security, support for tourism, recovery and growth, gender equality and economic inclusion of women and youth, and green economy interventions. And then, very importantly, mass public employment interventions, strengthening food security and macroeconomic interventions. But we don't get any alignment by the MEC in regard to those particular interventions. And what we also see, Deputy Speaker, is that the national government has an immediate implementation plan with time frames, with who's responsible, with budgets. But this province told us just last week that they don't have an implementation plan. We must wait until February. That's on the record. And like the safety plan, which has no actual implementation plan, the economic recovery plan in this province will be doomed to fail. So what we want from the MEC is a time-bound, clear plan. Where is the investment going? Who's responsible? What are the allocations? How do you integrate with the municipal infrastructure budget? But it is not this DA administration's interest to reaffirm the investment in infrastructure and how central infrastructure development is to our economic recovery as a country. Complete omission by the Honourable MEC on the investments into social housing. Another complete omission by the MEC on the investments into Tygerberg and Klipfontein hospitals that are coming from National. Another complete omission of the extra 7 billion provided by National Treasury to the equitable share to fee-paying public schools and government-subsidized independent schools, as announced by Minister Mboweni. Another complete omission, because the DA is not interested in giving our people dignity and have never been interested in giving our people hope. The hopes of domestic workers and other workers who've been saving for years to gain access to social housing in Tafelberg on the main road of Sea Point. Those hopes have been crushed by this DA administration, yet they want to talk about dignity and denying domestic workers dignity of social housing close to where they work. Instead of bouncing back from a global recession or global pandemic, this government is asking the people of the Western Cape to bounce back from failed budgetary priorities that effect redress over the last 10 years. One of the principles of DA's economic justice policy is that, I quote, people can never be entirely equal. In another place in the policy document, it states that the underlying criteria for assessment would shift from placing emphasis on narrow criteria towards addressing the drivers of poverty and inequality. In other words, there's a complete dismissal of our history as a country and a province whose inequalities are based on race, class, and gender, an absolute denial of that. One wonders how this DA administration is going to give our people dignity when they are in denial about how our communities, in fact, were born of these contributors to inequality, race, class, and gender. Give our people broad-based economic empowerment, and you give them dignity and hope. Recognize and don't dismiss the injustices of the past based on race, class, and gender. Give our people land, and you'll begin to recognize the dignity of our people. But the DA policies do not provide dignity and hope. I want to quote, Deputy Speaker, from the DA's manifesto in 2019, when they say, a labour market flexibility exemption clause aimed at making the process to hire and fire employees simpler and allowing potential employees to opt out of the relevant sectoral minimum wage, which is 3,500, and would have a new minimum of no less than the old age grant. That's 1,800 Rand. I want to ask you, MEC Mania, can you survive on 1,800 Rand? I want to ask the Honourable Premier, can you survive on 1,800 Rand? I want to ask MEC Bradell and Mackenzie, Honourable Mackenzie, can you survive on 1,800 Rand? Because your party's very policies are actually saying the minimum wage of 3,500 is too little. And that just shows exactly that this government, led by the DA, is actually an anti-poor government. And what we are saying as the ANC, which actually will contribute to greater equality, and we cannot only focus on jobs in a COVID, post-COVID situation, we've got to look at the inequality. Our organization, the African National Congress, is very clear when we have committed to pass national legislation in this term to ensure worker ownership via worker trust, share ownership schemes, and cooperatives. This will, in fact, Deputy Speaker, build on the minimum wage, making it into a living wage and actually ensure that wealth is shared so that workers get dividends and not simply a wage. But this is something that the DA powers that be simply cannot grasp and are not prepared to implement. So if we do this, we believe that actually you will be giving dignity by giving and guiding legislation which will ensure that there's actual ownership of the production. Even as workers then go into retirement, they will benefit from the profits generated by those companies. But this is anathema to the DA. The Honourable Madikizela comes from a community, Khayelitsha, a community created by the apartheid regime as a so-called new home for African people in our province. But the Honourable Madikizela, through his party's policies, wishes to actually deny that Khayelitsha was established along racial lines because race to the DA apparently is no longer important. They just mouth on racialism and don't understand the redress which is required because of racial discrimination. The Honourable Madikizela wants the people of this province and of Khayelitsha to believe that the DA believes in their dignity and to give them hope, while denying the very origins of the inequalities in Mitchell's Plain and in Khayelitsha, to mention a few. There is little doubt, Speaker, our country's economy is in a dire state. The global economy is in a dire state. What is required from all of us is not to try and score cheap points by misleading this House and attacking national government, coming up with PR phrases such as bouncing back. The MEC thinks this action that they're taking in terms of Section 79 is going to secure them votes that they've lost to the Freedom Front. It's not actually. Those Freedom Front voters have already shown you in other parts of the country that they're rejecting the DA. So as much as Helen Zille tries to force the DA to embark on a right-wing path, that is actually not going to assist the DA. The ANC in this House remains committed to ensuring that we strengthen confidence in our provincial economy and the national economy, but we believe that this confidence can only be built through diversification of sectors, especially the green and ocean economies, diversification in ownership, as I've referred to, and diversification in the sizes of our enterprises, especially through encouraging SMMEs in our province. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Dugmore. I now recognise Honourable Claire Paul.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The recent presentation of the second adjusted estimates by the Western Cape Minister of Finance and Economic Opportunities failed to live up to the expectations and inspire confidence in the millions of our people in the province who continue to live in abject poverty. These are the people without basic necessities of life and services such as shelter, water, refuse system, meaningful jobs, paying decent salaries. Whilst the minister's adjustments failed to take into account almost all these issues, he stood there and tried to teach us about what human dignity meant. The address was not only mediocre, but also sounded like a broken record, as it consisted of a repetition of quotes from the Western Cape Premier's previous speech. As the EFF were very much alive to the reality that there are additional allocations supplementing what is already being provided in the departmental budgets for the financial year at issue. However, we still maintain that not only are these allocations insignificant, but they will not make any real impact on the lives of our people. Whilst maintenance and the repair of infrastructure in schools will create some jobs, these will not be significant jobs with decent salaries to be able to make on lives of a dignified life. They will only tend to be what we call it piece jobs. Furthermore, the majority of small businesses suffered great financial losses as a result of COVID-19. So their aim will first to be to recoup their losses before they can even think of creating any real job opportunities. Another factor is that some of these businesses might have adopted innovative ways of producing outputs using less staff. So although additional funding assistance will contribute something to these small businesses, there is no guarantee that these efforts will turn into a real job opportunities. It is not surprising coming from the DA-led government to think that throwing millions of rands into fencing will also all of a sudden turn schools into a safe havens for children. Western Cape is the epicenter of crime in the whole South Africa, and no amount of fencing can stop and even reduce crime. It is like trying to treat a deep old wound using a plaster, hoping that in no time it will be healed. All will be as well and as business as usual. It is equally not surprising to see the DA resorting to using young people as the so-called safety ambassadors, because we all know that their so-called safety plan was nothing but a sham, which sounds real, but in the truth, it does not exist. The number of COVID-19 infections in the province are surging once again. In no time, Western Cape will need all hands on the deck. And whilst the minister continues to speak about the dignity of our people, the DA-led government continue to treat human community healthcare workers who were also in the forefront of the fight against COVID-19 as slaves. This past week, these workers had to come and protest outside this very same building for better pay and permanent jobs, amongst other things, because the Minister of Health, Minister Mbongo, failed to keep on her promise. To show that this government does not care about these workers, the Minister of Health in question refused to address them and to even receive their memorandum of demands. It is our view that as the EFF that these additional adjustments, allocations are nothing other than an attempt by the DA-led government to do damage control in a year
your time is
in
up.
which they performed dismally in all fronts.
You're done. Thank you very much. I recognize Honourable Bartman.
Deputy Speaker, are you able to hear me?
Hear you clearly. Thank you.
Thank you. Honourable Deputy Speaker, fellow South Africans, today we are debating the Western Cape Second Adjustment Budget, the first of its kind, a budget in a time of global health pandemic, a budget to save jobs and to save lives. It reminds me of one of my favorite quotes by Oprah. Do what you have to do until you can do what you want to do. Because, Deputy Speaker, as a province, we need to know that we need to do what we have to do until we can do what we want to do. And that is exactly what Premier Windy and Minister Mania has done. In the Finance, Economic Opportunities and Tourism Standing Committee, it was revealed that so far 65 million rand has been allocated by the Western Cape government to support small, medium and micro enterprises in the province this year already. SMMEs is part of the core of any economy, which is why the Western Cape government has allocated 38 million rand intervention through the Western Cape Business Relief Fund. This fund has seen more than 2,000 jobs saved and over 230 SMMEs assisted through the fund. Further, 14 million rand has been spent by the Western Cape SMME Booster Project, which has had tremendous success, where 500 SMMEs have benefited, 443 jobs created, and a funding partnership of more than 40 million rand secured. Township businesses and other innovative projects have not been left behind, with 5 million rand allocated to a furniture manufacturing design studio in Nyanga, expansion of coding labs and prototype markers space program in Kraaifontein, rapid product prototyping program in Thembalethu, and enterprise coding lab and drone accelerator program at the West Coast College. The Department of Economic Opportunities and Tourism has further allocated 1 million rand to the Western Cape Business Chamber program, which saw 5 business chambers supported with 6,396 SMME beneficiaries, and which led to the establishment of an informal beneficiary base of 2,159 businesses. Further, 1 million rand was allocated to the Early Childhood Development Centre registration project, and this is proof that the Western Cape government continues to recognize the significant and unique contribution that SMMEs make to the provincial economy. Millions of rands will be distributed to projects, programs, and private businesses which have far-reaching potential for creating and protecting job opportunities and the safety and well-being of Western Cape residents. The DA in the Western Cape continue to prioritize and support SMMEs and programs which create job opportunities and support the dignity of all residents. But Speaker, Deputy Speaker, I apologize. As much as I love Oprah, as a government, we cannot emulate everything that Oprah does. We need to focus on spending the little money we have well. We need to stretch an already stretched budget, a budget that is being cut year upon year in order to fund zombie state-owned enterprises. In the 2020-2021 financial year, South Africa had to fund a 56 billion rand bailout for Eskom. This year, we have to fund a 10.5 billion rand bailout for SAA. And everyone seems to forget that Eskom is due for another 33 billion rand in 2021-2022 and another 23 billion rand in 2022-2023, as revealed last year in the Budget Committee. This is separate to the 49 billion rand allocated to Eskom in the 2019-2020 financial year. Deputy Speaker, we cannot cut provincial budgets in order to bail out an SOE every single year. We are working with public money, money which belongs to the people of South Africa. But currently the national government is giving out bailouts like it's Oprah's favorite things. Ons almal kan ons wragtig waar nie 'n bailout kry elke jaar nie. Dit is mos nie reg nie. The Western Cape government has exercised unparalleled fiscal responsibility over the years, allowing the province to now use its reserves and mobilize 1.7 billion rand for its fiscal transition support facility, which can support departments in the medium term to find more cost-effective and smarter ways of delivering services. This will support and cushion departments even after national government cut the provincial equitable share. We therefore commend the Provincial Treasury for being prepared for such challenging economic times. By using its own reserves, the province is protecting the budgets of critical services such as education and healthcare from spending pressures which would otherwise compromise the dignity and hope of Western Cape residents. The budget cuts by national government place a significant strain on the provincial government's ability to provide service delivery to residents. Should the wage freeze on public employees' compensation fail, the 2.3 billion rand needed for salary adjustments would cause a liquidity squeeze to the province's finances, which it cannot afford. The steps announced by the province will, however, see to it that the Western Cape is able to weather the current economic storm. Now the national government must play its part and not continue to place undue financial pressure on the province. The adjustment to the provincial equitable share as per the final 2020 MTEF allocation letter in slide 16 of the Budget Committee presentation, which Honourable Dugmore attended, is 26.1 billion rand for the MTEF period, the period 2020-21 to 2023-2024, Deputy Speaker, which will affect the provincial equitable share. This is separate to the 2 billion rand cut by the national government in the first adjustment budget and the 2.3 billion rand cut in the second adjustment budget. Then, because of provincial reserve fund, the net cut in the second adjustment budget is obviously 1.5 billion rand. The total conditional grant increases in DORA was 62 million rand, but the total conditional grant decreases is 128 million rand in the second adjustment, which created a net decrease of conditional grants to the Western Cape of 66 million rand. Deputy Speaker, members of the opposition must not mislead this House. The Budget Committee today unanimously adopted a resolution to invite the Minister for Public Enterprises, Pravin Gordhan, and his department to explain the rationale of the 10.5 billion rand bailout for SAA. The committee would like that department to explain exactly how it came to this 10.5 billion rand and how it determined how much money would be cut from each department and every province. We will thus call on the National Minister to account for the decision that it made, and I'm hopeful that Minister Gordhan will participate and address the Budget Committee's concerns. Furthermore, the committee also unanimously agreed that it will call on the national government to explain the impact on the finances of the Western Cape should the attempt by national government to freeze the public wage bill be unsuccessful. Both national and provincial treasury have expressed concerns over the failure of the wage freeze, saying that should it fail, severe strain will be placed on government budgets. Despite drastic budget cuts to the province this year by national government, including cuts to our title deeds, land reform and provincial roads grant, the Western Cape is committed to creating jobs, dignity and safety for its residents. Deputy Speaker, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Bartman. I now recognise Honourable Heron.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, the Western Cape is in deep trouble. Our government and this governing party is adrift, unable to present a coherent plan to navigate the financial turmoil we're in. The so-called budget to bounce back is nothing more than a Potemkin village, a pretentiously showy facade intended to mask or divert attention from this embarrassing fact. This government claims it will spend an additional 1.1 billion rand on jobs. 814 million of this is the Presidential Employment Initiative, which by design will fund additional posts in the education sector. This is creating jobs by direct employment, not by stimulating a sector of our economy. Then they have added in the 61 million additional conditional grant for road maintenance and 155 million rand for maintenance and infrastructure repairs at schools. Obviously, infrastructure spending does generate jobs in the construction sector, but if they want to add the additional allocations for infrastructure and claim this as contributing to job creation, they must also subtract where this government is failing to spend on infrastructure. For example, the Department of Transport and Public Works has surrendered 155 million rand from its transport infrastructure budget due to slow spending on road infrastructure projects. It has also surrendered 45 million rand from its public works infrastructure budget because it has failed to spend this on the maintenance of child and youth care centres. In addition to surrendering 200 million rand from its infrastructure projects, the department has transferred 90 million rand from transport infrastructure projects due to slow spending to non-infrastructure items like integrated transport hub and the Go George project. So, Deputy Speaker, when it comes to infrastructure-based job creation, we are actually in negative territory because this government cannot spend the money it already has. It is profoundly dishonest to add in the additional allocations, but not to deduct the surrendering and the verimented funding. The intention is obviously to mislead the people of this province. Deputy Speaker, on the subject of misleading, this government and the governing party claims that the source of all woes is the SAA bailout. They claim the provincial government's conditional grants were cut by 86 million rand to finance the bailout. But in actual fact, the province received a net increase in conditional grants of 81 million rand, and the cuts they refer to are in reality a reprioritization of spending. While they complained about the national government policy to rescue SAA, their own 2019 election manifesto proposes that SAA be placed into business rescue. This is exactly what has led to the need to find 10.5 billion rand. Perhaps, Deputy Speaker, they don't understand business rescue or just sounded good in a manifesto. But, Deputy Speaker, they never deal with the Minister of Public Enterprises' claim that if SAA was liquidated, the South African fiscus would have to find 18 billion rand to cover debt that would immediately become due. Deputy Speaker, at a time where we need level heads, smart minds, and honest brokers, we have a government flailing about and purposefully misleading the people of this province. They are simply not up to the task.
Your time is up. Thank you very much. I recognize Honourable Christians.
Kenneth B. Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, the ACDP, when we look at the medium-term budget, we cannot look at the budget in isolation. We must look at the foolishness of national government to bail out SAA. I cannot agree that we're just looking at the Western Cape. We must look at everything holistically. It is Albert Einstein who said, and I quote, "Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results," close quote. We cannot keep on bailing out and expecting a different result. Speaker, the minister said that the province and he spoke about the Premier's address choosing to focus on jobs, safety, and well-being. Now, Deputy Speaker, if this is so, why is the Premier contemplating to have district lockdowns? I read in the media that the Premier is sitting with the Cabinet on Friday to discuss potential district lockdowns because of the resurgence of COVID-19. Was the purpose of the lockdown not to assist the health sector to prepare for COVID-19 cases? The Western Cape cannot afford, the country cannot afford another lockdown. Thousands and thousands of our people has lost their jobs. Small businesses will be bankrupt even further and never ever recover. The unemployment queues are getting longer and longer. We cannot make people to rely on government to assist because government has failed them and will fail them over and over again. The UIF and SASSA was a disaster. People were disappointed and disheartened by the services they receive. Did the Premier and his cabinet research internationally and learn from best practices? I would advise the Premier to do best practices internationally and come back with a different result. The ANC in the Western Cape should assist this province to speak to the national counterparts, because we cannot, and the ANC Western Cape cannot divorce themselves from their big brother, because their big brother is the cause that we are in a financial mess. Deputy Speaker, another thing that I want to address this afternoon is that why doesn't the province and the government look at, people don't have food. A mere 50 million was given for food by this province for people in the most vulnerable communities. But people are, of course, they will get the virus because they don't even have food. Why don't we look at proactive
Your time is up,
measures
Honourable
like
Member.
promoting immune boosters and giving people sufficient food? I thank you.
So
Thank you very much, Honourable Christians. Order. I recognise Honourable Allen.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I believe that Big Brother is watching some of us, but let me get into it. Speaker, Deputy Speaker, I believe that by creating a safer South Africa, a safer Western Cape, we can ensure prosperity for all residents. But before I get into the medium-term adjustments for 2020, I want to bring to the attention of this House again that over the last 10 years, policing resources at national grew by 11%, while resources in the Western Cape grew by a mere 4.8%. Over the same period, Deputy Speaker, the police to population ratio in the province stands at 2.5% for every 1,000 residents, and 3.3 for every 1,000 residents at the national level. This is way below the United Nations policing ratio standards. What I can further say, Speaker, is that policing resources in our province are 6 percentage points lower, while the national police to population ratio. But we all know that here in the Western Cape, population growth stood at 30.1% over the last 10 years. Typically, any person who relocates from a different province to the Western Cape do so because they are attracted to better opportunities in the labor force and by greater chances to improve their standard of living. But we have seen, Deputy Speaker, that the ANC government has chosen to cut essential services to the public, like policing, and the budget for the courts and the NPA to fund another bailout for the South African Airways. The ANC ultimately has bankrupted the state and broken the economy to such an extent that the safety of South African citizens are now at an increased risk. Deputy Speaker, crime thrives in a broken economy. This can further be seen that in the second quarterly crime stats that was released by SAPS shows an alarming decrease of 46.5% in crime detected as a result of police action. Speaker, we need action, and we need action from SAPS as in yesteryear. This is as clear as it can be. The stats back it up. The Western Cape is indeed severely under-resourced by an incompetent national government. Deputy Speaker, the Western Cape has further recorded 4 of the top 10 police stations for contact crime, 8 of the top 10 stations where the highest number of murders have been recorded, and 7 of the top 10 for attempted murder in our country. Die nasionale regering kan nie en moet nie die Wes-Kaap as 'n stief behandel nie. Speaker, we all know that these stats are horrifying and it stifles social and economic mobility in the country. And furthermore, it's a desperate need to increase the SAPS budget. This finds reality on the ground for residents who have come to accept criminal behavior as the order of the day due to the inability by national government to adequately resource the police services to stem the tide on crime. This is clearly evident, Deputy Speaker, in the DORA bill, which shows no action. The issues are further compounded by the fact that businesses in our province are repeatedly being targeted by criminals. We cannot, and I say we cannot, have an environment where businesses lack assurances for safety for both themselves, their staff, and customers. Cases of extortion has expanded beyond businesses here in the CBD to areas like Khayelitsha, Bloekenbos, Gugulethu, and Wallisdene. And Deputy Speaker, should such criminal activity slide into lawlessness, economic growth and job creation will be further hampered. It is vital that the National Police Minister act to curb this scourge, as it is not only aimed at businesses, but also at the poorest of the poor. Deputy Speaker, the fiscal space at national government level would not be depleted had it not been for looting, maladministration, bad policy, and a failure to really table an economic policy that works for the people and prioritize the needs for more resources to improve safety responses in our communities. And it is rather a shame that we are in this state at this moment, because the ANC deemed it appropriate to cut the budget for SAPS in spite the state of gang murders in our province and rural safety in other areas of our province. Deputy Speaker, this has placed a severe strain on provincial treasury, and therefore, without reservation, I welcome the increase in the budget to the Department of Community Safety. Speaker, the increase in this budget by the Department of Community Safety showcases that the priority of the residents is first and foremost. If I check and if I go through all the adjustments for this particular vote and the entire vote, the upward adjustment for the department, which is clearly action. Further, it is an additional 20 million to appoint young people as safety ambassadors to drive violence prevention interventions in the Western Cape. 70 officers have already been deployed in the province who assist in patrolling communities that are plagued with crime and to address antisocial behaviors. We've also in this budget seen the deployment of 1,000 youth in the EPWP program, as well as train and place 120 peace officers in 6 municipalities. Furthermore, Deputy Speaker, this budget will fund 45 neighborhood watchers for their invaluable work, because we all know that they are the ears and eyes for SAPs on the road, on the streets. I further wish to especially welcome an additional 36.5 million to keep our children safe by accelerating the fencing of schools in the Western Cape. The increase, Deputy Speaker, in this budget will further allow for a new intake of the cohort into the Chrysalis Academy that has been proven to assist thousands of vulnerable young people year on year. Deputy Speaker, it is further encouraging that these projects will not only be confined to the metro, but also be extended to the rural areas under the district safety plans. The reality is that millions of people residing in rural communities are under siege due to the violent and vicious crimes due to a failing police that is presided over a failing ANC government. The ANC has ultimately lost the fight against crime, and our rural areas are becoming war zones. Farmers and farm workers are sitting ducks, and the ANC simply ignore their plight. We have been on the record numerous times calling for a police service that is well-resourced, well-trained, and capable to fight all levels of crime in our communities, whether in the metro or in rural areas. Deputy Speaker, the upward adjustments highlighted some of the steps taken in a whole society approach by the provincial government to boost the safety budget here, in the Western Cape, to not only supplement crime fighting efforts, but also to improve the safety of learners, residents in various communities, businesses, organizations, each and every person in the Western Cape. This Western Cape government has proven capable to manage a decentralized police service where the ANC has dismally failed. It is understanding that the importance of a functional and honest police service. Deputy Speaker, it is regrettable that at the last attention received from the national government was a promise regarding the deployment of the army for the attacks on our transportation services. But when what we need is more SAPS officers, we need to build trust in this constitutionally mandated service and the restoration of a professional and efficient police service. Deputy Speaker, earlier during a budget committee, we noted that the ANC expressed their view not to support the vote. In other words, the ANC expressed their view by going against creating a safer Western Cape. The ANC went against a budget that will further efforts to violence prevention and law enforcement. Furthermore, the ANC went against investing in the well-being of residents. To put it even a different way, the ANC is against good governance with actual results and rather for looting, maladministration, and corruption. Deputy Speaker, as I close off, we have already seen significant strides made with the deployment of the LEAP officers in areas like Nova Park and Delft. This budget aims to further efforts of violence prevention and law enforcement. And by investing in safety responses, we create and promote jobs, which in turn restore dignity. A vote against the second adjustment budget in the Western Cape is a vote against the residents of the Western Cape. And I would urge this House to support this budget vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Allen. I now recognise Honourable Peter Murray.
Thank you, Chair. Minister Mayeri, you are a great supporter of Premier Winnie's recipe for change speech. I heard you. The Premier wants to focus on 3 North Stars: job, safety, well-being. But the Premier adds this: beauty. He says he wants to give it to everybody, no matter who they are or where they come from. Well, Premier and Mainir, the people you're talking about, you want to empower Zimbabweans, Malawians, Nigerians. They're flocking every day over our borders. They walk through the loans, 34 million fence to come here and squat and get houses before our people. They're the illegal immigrants. The jobs that DA want to create goes to them. It doesn't go to local blacks or local colored people. The 39 million you want to spend on local small businesses are wasteful spending. It cannot compete against foreign cartels who have taken over Green Market Square, the Grand Parade, Adelaide Street, Belleville Station, Elsies River, and this is under DA control. Colored people and local black entrepreneurs are being suffocated and drugs are being sold illegal to our youth. Stop, DA. Stop feeling sorry for foreign people. Feel sorry for your own voters, for the colored people, for the blacks, for the whites who voted for you. Start feeling sorry for them, because otherwise a coup d'etat is staring South Africa in the face. We will have our own Arab Spring. Just look at Africa's records. Look at the coup d'etats. Ghana had 5, Liberia had 2, Mali had 3, Mauritania had 6, Niger 4, Nigeria 6. For 32 years, Nigeria was under army. Then Sierra Leone at 5, Togo at 2. Don't think it's impossible. We can have a coup d'etat here too, where the army decides to take over. Already we had some political parties leaders saying the people must go and get the police in their own homes. Yeah, get them in their own homes, Malema. We will see what happens. Who's going to be gotten in his own home? We are heading for disaster. We're heading for civil unrest. And unless the DA and other parties realize that we need federal autonomy, we need to go back and give to the colored community what was theirs before 1910. The Cape Colony we wanted back. That was the Missions Act of 1909. All those areas that was given to us in terms of a trust must be given back. And I'm glad the National Minister agreed with me. And I've got a report from her saying it will be done. 1.3 million hectares of land will be given back to the colored communities before March next year. So, Minister Mainir, you can moan all you like, as long as you don't have the power to implement your policies. It's all just a fairy tale created by the DA. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Murray. I now recognise Honourable Minister Fernandes.
Honourable Deputy Speaker, Honourable Members, the Premier, never before has South Africa and the Western Cape Province faced such a bleak future. We have been affected by the global pandemic of COVID-19, as well as an economic recession, which has been in the making for the last few years. Recently, South Africa has been downgraded to junk status, which does not augur well for the Western Cape and its citizens, as we have had to absorb severe budget cuts, as alluded to by Minister Mainir in his opening remarks. The Department of Social Development, too, has had to absorb significant cuts in the face of a humanitarian crisis. These cuts will affect the most vulnerable members of society, including women, children, persons with disabilities, and the elderly, amongst others. A recent United Nations report indicates that there will be a 40% spike in the number of people needing humanitarian aid globally. Honourable Deputy Speaker, it is not just in South Africa, but many countries are reporting a surge in cases of domestic and sexual violence, also known as gender-based violence, as well as increased levels of violence against children. It is in this regard that I have committed to working with various spheres of government, civil society organizations, our NPO and FPO partners, and any other grouping of active citizens that aim to provide support to victims of violence and abuse or are fighting to end violence. Deputy Speaker, I wish to inform this august House, especially the Honourable Heron, through you, Deputy Speaker, and place on record the fact that the National Department of Public Works and Infrastructure finally signed the Memorandum of Understanding between the Provincial Departments of Social Development and Public Works on the 29th of October 2020. This after being launched on the 4th of March and the Honourable Heron calling me out for dragging my heels. So I trust this clarifies any confusion that the Honourable Heron tried to create by misleading this House. Now that the MOU has been signed by all the necessary stakeholders, DSD, with the support of its NPO partners, will ensure that the 6 shelters will be ready to start taking clients in, hopefully by the first quarter of the new year. We only received the official sign-over and keys at the beginning of the week, so we need to work swiftly to operationalize these shelters. At the same time, our existing shelters continue to provide the much-needed support to victims of gender-based violence. This development, honourable members, reaffirms our commitment to providing victim empowerment support services to those who desperately need it, especially during the 16 days of no violence against women and children. Deputy Speaker, violence against women and children sees and knows no race, ethnicity, class, or political affiliation. Speaker, just this morning, Deputy Speaker, just this morning, I attended the launch of a 24-hour toll-free number by the National Women's Shelter Movement to assist the National GBV Command Centre in assisting women and children who are affected by gender-based violence. Our government's recovery plan, which focuses on safety, jobs, and employment, as well as dignity and well-being, is crucial to mitigating the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Deputy Speaker, the DA-led Western Cape government has remained steadfast in providing services to the residents of this province, particularly the most vulnerable. Sadly, the ANC national government continues to leave this government and its people out on a limb. We have experienced the most irrational and draconian regulations ever imposed on citizens in any country in the world. We were told what clothes we could and could not wear. The most vulnerable citizens experienced delays with a SASSA SRD payment of 350 Rand. The queues outside post offices that never received the required funds to pay grants continues, not forgetting the hot food debacle, where it was recommended that SAPS should be delivering food, stopping the payment of ECD subsidies during the first few months of lockdown in the 8 ANC-run provinces, resulting in a damning court judgment against National DSD and the 8 provinces. The failure to communicate with the ECD sector timelessly, which virtually decimated the sector, with women bearing the brunt of job losses. And now, Honourable Deputy Speaker, we are challenged with the migration of ECD centres from social development to the Department of Basic Education by, guess when? The 1st of April 2021. So once again, the Western Cape government has to be the voice of reason and caution against rushing into any migration without considering all aspects, as it could have many unintended consequences which will affect the lives of our young children. We welcome that an additional 53 million has been made available in the form of an early childhood development conditional grant. Sadly, it is almost too little too late, as it is the same ANC national government that almost decimated the entire ECD sector in South Africa by its inability to lead decisively after level 5 and 4. An additional 51,281,000 has been received for food relief funding in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. This too, though, comes too little too late, as these allocations, in my opinion, constitutes fiscal dumping. It places provinces under huge pressure to ensure that funding is utilized before the end of the financial year, which is the 31st of March 2021. Honourable Deputy Speaker, it would be remiss of me if I did not comment on the rampant looting, corruption and plundering of the public purse, which continues unabated. I would like to request the ANC opposition members especially to add their voices to the call for an end to corruption which is taking place across this country. The bailing out of SOEs like SAA and many others impact all citizens negatively across South Africa. We have chicken and beef in the sky, whilst the most vulnerable wait on the next plate of soup or pap. It is shameful, immoral, and scandalous that a government can prioritize money for a black hole SAA SOE at the cost of its citizens who are living in abject poverty and don't know where their next plate of food is coming from. We could do so much more if taxpayers' money was used for its intended purpose. More ECDs could be supported, as many continue to struggle with obtaining the necessary financial resources to meet all COVID-19 health and safety protocols with regards to reopening. More feeding schemes and soup kitchens could be supported. We could have established more shelters for abused women and children, more facilities for older and disabled persons. We could have established more substance abuse treatment centers, which continue to be in demand as the use of drugs surges with crime on the increase. We could have built more schools, hospitals, hired more social workers, doctors and nurses, and employed more SAPS officials, and the list continues. Deputy Speaker, Minister Mainir has indeed provided a sound and clear financial plan, a recovery plan whilst managing the COVID-19 resurgence challenge is really a difficult task to manage. So I wish to call on all spheres of society and all members of the opposition to join us in rebuilding our economy whilst keeping our citizens safe and building a province in which each resident is granted the opportunity to live a dignified life. We have made great strides, however the needs and demands placed on our departments, especially in light of the severe budget cuts, will impact our collective efforts.
Minister Murray, Minister Fernandes, your time is up.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you very much. I recognize Honourable Nkondlo.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, members of the House, fellow citizens. Let me join many in raising our voice in this Parliament regarding the long road we have traversed as a nation in the fight against the scourge of HIV and AIDS. We take our hats off to many men and women who continue to show their unwavering commitment in the health sector to carry the nation's health. We must also recognize the period of 16 days of activism against violence on children, women, and bow our heads in sorrow for victims of GBV in our province and communities. We must further raise concern on the resurgence of COVID-19 in our province, and once again, the same hotspot areas of the Cape Flats. What happened to the hotspot strategy and the budget allocated to it? In around May 2020, almost 1.15 billion rands was reported by Provincial Treasury to have been contributed to the hotspot strategy. Where is value for money? I rise today, Deputy Speaker, on behalf of the African National Congress to reject this medium-term budgetary policy statement as announced by the Honorable Mainir last week in this House. Whilst we are conscious of the state of the global and national economy, and while we are mindful of the drop in revenue in the national fiscus, we cannot support an MTBPS which continues to prioritize the privileged over the poor, and this under the banner of dignity and hope. Honorable members, let us be reminded that the political season is upon us, and so this degradation of political conversation using sound bites as part of the propaganda and posturing to sow confusion amongst voters and avert them from the real injustice of human conditions in this province represented by the Blue Train detachment. The Premier postures about dignity in framing his speech a month ago in this House, and the MEC follows suit without explaining to us what is meant by dignity, what are its elements, for who, and how will we measure such dignity of the Western Cape citizens if it is realized. We know, sitting on this side of the bench, that such term is not neutral, and the Blue Train has clearly chosen what dignity means for the different categories of citizens of this province. Nelson Mandela said, open quote, overcoming poverty is not a gesture of charity. It is an act of justice. It is the protection of a fundamental human right, the right to dignity and a decent life. We implore the Western Cape government to deal with inequality in this province as a sign of their political will on the right of dignity of its citizens. We call for economic dignity as explained by Gene Sterling, a US economic advisor in the Obama administration, that such should measure the cumulative impact of the economy and economic policy to human well-being. Such will help us direct our financial resources where the most of our vulnerable citizens are, with a deliberate intention to alleviate their misery. One myth this DA government continue to feed is through its policy tribalism about idealized assumptions about private sector-led growth and job creation. Shouldn't the proof be in the pudding or eating? As to date, the market failures evidence through structural deficiencies and uncompetitive behavior. Go and check the Competition Commission market inquiry that relates in particular to some of the sectors of the economy in our province, has proved how they undercut economic dignity. So how does the Premier and his MEC pin their hopes and faith in such, whilst evidence is looking them in the eye, unless they couldn't care about such? Thus the song of dignity is just a farce. It can't be, and it is not obvious, that a job results in dignity. The reason the International Labour Organization has for years called for decent jobs as such equals human dignity. And we await the MEC to actually answer the question from Honorable Dagmo, if indeed 1,800 is something that he can live on, including the Premier. Without deviations from the norm, progress is not possible. This is a quote by Frank Zappa. The Premier told us about 20,000 new jobs to be created through rapid interventions, he said. No mention is made of this or where these jobs will be created by the MEC. We heard from the Premier of 26 private sector investment, which will create over 3,000 jobs, pump 30 billion into the economy, and investment in property and construction sectors, logistics, health, and investment in Saldanha Bay Industrial Development Zone and the Atlantis. No details of how any of these will be achieved, especially since these jobs are reliant on an external stakeholder as a player, that is the private sector, where no clear accountability of such is explained. Maybe we should have called for the private sector to come and present to us and tell us about these jobs as per their own business plans and budgets, if indeed such is feasible, before such claim is made by a party that is not even responsible for creating such jobs. If dignity of our citizens through jobs is placed at the hands of the markets, then surely we have a bigger problem in our hands. Recently in Mossel Bay and George, from our recent standing committee oversight visit, we listened to business chambers accepting a preference of employing foreign nationals than locals based on some untested perceptions they hold. Worse, this has seen illegal immigrants being used mainly in the infrastructure and construction projects, given their bargaining power, which is weak and non-existent at most. So cases of abuse and predatory practices are evident in these situations in the name of providing jobs. And such no dignity is realized in that relationship. Instead, humiliation and domination as workers are expected to accept employment on whatever terms the employer dictates. This is true for big corporates, bullying experienced in particular in the same space where big contractors ignore national policies of local beneficiation, local participation, in some cases pay emerging and local contractors less than the stipulated rates. The announcement on SMMEs and the basic maintenance and repair of infrastructure at our school is an achievement after repeated calls to this provincial government. We must commend this work of the opposition in this House, our ANC caucus, and in particular the unrelenting work of Honorable Khalid Sayed that has put pressure on WCED to prioritize the safety of our learners and educators, especially in the poorer parts of our province. We must call on Provincial Treasury to focus on harnessing capacity in the supply chain management to ensure increased fairness in procurement, to open up these economic opportunities to not only big business, but also local enterprises around those schools. In the 39 million to SMMEs, can the MEC tell this House about impact of the first 27 million in the first adjustment, and how many SMMEs in real terms were assisted, and how much of this money went to ancillary costs? Again, the funding to the wine industry is important to this sector in view of the recent protests by Black-owned brands calling for transformation of the wine sector. We ask Honorable MEC, what happened to some of the announcements made by the Premier, like the Infrastructure Agency, that in your speech is now couched as an exploration of new institutional mechanisms and forms of financing? Are we again made to sign a blank check of exploratory work similar to the Premier Safety Plan without plans and clarity on where the public funds will be spent on? You have also gone silent on any budget for the grand plans you had been raising in the public on municipalities in good financial position to pursue alternative energy. Lastly, Deputy Speaker, we must be concerned that the Premier's recovery plan and this adjustment budget shows no real intent by this government to deal with income inequality that is prevalent in this province. This is a battle that we shall never back down on, and are already being joined by many voters as shown in the DA losses of by-election in this province. So this idealized assumption of a job and dignity is superficial and mischievous, as the DA project of One South Africa has been, that crumbles conference by conference as white supremacy clutches in straws to keep it together. We must ask in this House, where is the Speaker of this House? Maybe the sayings in the media are true, that he may feel unsafe in the presence of the leader of business. So we need answers in this regard. As you complain and whine, the ANC-led government under President Cyril Ramaphosa must implement the National Economic Recovery Plan to deal with structural issues of the SA economy towards rebuilding an economy different from yesterday, one that is inclusive to all, one that guarantees economic dignity for all. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Nkombo. I now recognize Honourable Mackenzie.
Thank you, Honourable Deputy Speaker. Thank you for the members of the House for the contribution to this debate, and thank you for those that were present today, because their contribution contributed to this very important second division of revenue debate. Deputy Speaker, on this World AIDS Day, we recognize and hold hands with everyone that battles with this terrible disease, and will work hand in hand with the government to eradicate this disease. We thank the Western Cape government under the leadership of Premier Windy and Dr. Mafred, that consistently work in destigmatizing the disease in our community. We also want to thank everyone in government and in parliament as well that continuously work to combat violence against women, including during the 60 days of activism, and thank the Western Cape government for running their programs 360 days a year to ensure our women and children are safe. Deputy Speaker, through you to Honourable Dago, I would advise that you try again setting the national government's successful HIV/AIDS policy in managing AIDS. History doesn't have any blank pages. I'd like to remind the honorable member it was the ANC, his party, that led the campaign, the HIV/AIDS denialism for HIV/AIDS. The party he's been a member of good standing for many years. Those lives are now lost. Again, last time that we speak, I think it was 300,000 lives that was lost. And we remember this ANC created humanitarian tragedy. Bobby Mdakwa was a member, and I see he's leaving now because the truth does hurt. There's a clear neglect of the pro-poor agenda from the national government. And this is in stark contrast to the Western Cape government, which has a real meaningful plan for HIV/AIDS. Honourable Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Dagmo was in the committee when the Western Cape Review recovery plan was tabled. It has been party to many of these committees, unlike Member Heron, wasn't even present, but he's got a strong opinion, but we all know the washing line opinions don't hold. Our plan represented by the Western Cape government gets people to work and thereby set it on a course to dignity. We enable people to their full potential. We don't create dependency on the state forever. But at the same time, we maintain a vital safety net for those who need them. For example, our support to the wine sector, which employs a tremendous number of low to medium income workers, as well as our feeding scheme, which for the start of the lockdown was the only one to continue, despite basic education, seeking to stop the Western Cape government from feeding our children. In fact, thank you for giving credit to Minister Schaefer. It's a pity that you now want to take credit for the Western Cape government's work, but it's great to see that you acknowledge our work is getting done, despite the fact that you want to own it. But thank you for that nonetheless. And Member Dabo in absentia, but I know you can listen to the recording, let me remind you again of what the Premier really said, and I quote, the Western Cape government's budget over the medium term are likely to be cut by the same amount or more that is now going to be funneled into the black hole, which is SAA. Let me be crystal clear. Over 10 billion is going to be taken out of the mouths of the poor to pay for our failed state airline, close quote. This is where this 10 billion issue comes from. The Premier did not say the Western Cape budget will be reduced by 10 billion, Deputy Speaker. Ultimately, the Western Cape is able to achieve what we have and what we will do because we have exercised sound fiscal management over many years, unlike the ANC, which is bailing out SAEs as a direct opportunity cost for service delivery and lifelines year after year. This is exasperated by the consistent bloated cabinet in large government structures for cadre deployment and widespread corruption and wasteful expenditure, revealing a distinct lack of principled governance by the ANC. Honourable Dagmo, by the way, Deputy Speaker, the ANC, by taking away, thank you for coming back, Honourable Dagmo, I'll be softer. The ANC, by taking away billions from the poor, it's the only party that insults the dignity of the poor. How do you take away money from health, the police, education, from the poor to give to the select few that can afford to fly? That is an insult to dignity, Honourable Dagmo. That is an insult to millions of people that's supposed to travel by train, which, by the way, remember, Dagmo, the Mitchells Plain line is still closed. The Central line is still closed. People cannot get to work because of mismanagement by the ANC. And if anything, Honourable Deputy Speaker, if the ANC really wanted to sort out transport in this country, that 10 billion would have been much better spent on PRASA and fixing the Cape Flats line as opposed to serving chicken and beef in the air. Honourable Deputy Speaker, the DA does care. Hence, the DA is the only party that is now taking this funding matter to court. And well done, Minister Mania, the only province that bothers to take this seriously. And on that matter, Deputy Speaker, I was debating on the NCOP, and Honourable Mania, I was so embarrassed. And I think I should be celebrating, but I was embarrassed that Limpopo and the Free State didn't even bother to meet to give an opinion on this division of revenue bill. Billions are being taken from their provinces and didn't have the decency to give an opinion on what the impact on their provinces should be. So when we talk good governance, Deputy Speaker, even the members of the ANC, some members of this House, come to the budget meetings, give an opinion, even if they disagree. The two provinces who are battling at the moment, didn't even bother to have a meeting. And when I raised it, Minister Tito Mboweni just lowered his head, and it's there for everyone to see on YouTube. That is the terrible state the ANC is in, and that is the state they put the country in. So if Honourable Dagmo is serious about dignity, he would phone up his colleagues and say, comrades, come down, man, go to the meeting, have an opinion.
That is how you restore dignity, Member Dugmore, by holding your colleagues to account for their terrible behavior, by not having a budget meeting, one of the most important committees of Parliament that determine the future of funding in your province. And during a pandemic, they didn't even bother to pitch up. Isn't that disgraceful? That is disgraceful, Member Dugmore, and that is taking dignity from the poor. It is the ANC in those provinces that strip the dignity. It's the ANC in this province, by not supporting this budget vote for the poor, this good budget vote, they are stripping the poor from their dignity. The ANC has contempt for the poor, and consistently in their behavior by voting against all these budgets. That is contempt for the poor. Giving poor people jobs, Member Dugmore, is not the only solution to dignity. It is quite sad that the national government think that public sector job is going to get this country out of our economy. Unfortunately, I got words for President Ramaphosa. It is not going to happen. Change your policies. Change your policy. Consistent policy, not giving billions to ailing black hole enterprises like SAA, and taking money from the poor like the police, health, and education. That is what's going to help this economy, not throwing 10 billion down the drain, creating temporary jobs and expecting the economy to somehow recover. That is not what's going to go. The policy of keeping SAA, the policy of bailing out SAA to the tune of 40 billion over many years, the policy of cadre deployment, these are policy that keeps the poor people poor, and that is the problem. Honorable Keko, the safety plan has already been implemented. The officers are on the scene and already deployed to communities. You see, Honorable Member Keko, with these, via you, Deputy Speaker, where these have taken place, we already see a decline in some of these communities. In talking about COVID-19 infections, which you mentioned, Honorable Keko, I would remind you, it was your party, the EFF, that went to Brackenfell without masks. It was your party that toyed without masks, spreading of the virus in this community. You, Honorable Keko, should actually take responsibility for that. Because the spreading of the virus is those not wearing a mask, in close distance with each other, no social distancing, and that is what you should actually apologize to the House, because that's what your party has done. That's on you. Honorable Member Heron, thank you for your contribution. I would like to remind Honorable Member Heron of a term called economic opportunity cost, which I'm sure he is familiar with. It's rather to spend money on housing, health, and those safety needs, and innovation opportunities that create jobs, and giving it to SAA, as you know, it's a big opportunity cost less. So why is Member Heron defending the SAA bailout? That's what I'm asking myself when I'm sitting here. Why is it so important for him, for the good ANC alliance, to stay intact? Are there cabinet compositions that must be considered? We know that his political mother needs to stay there for their party to survive. You see, Honorable Deputy Speaker, it is worth noting that Member Barron didn't even attend the budget meeting. As far I can't remember seeing his face in the budget meeting. How do you inform a view not attending such an important meeting where billions are being discussed? You see, the problem with the ANC Good Washing Line Alliance is that it never will stay, because washing lines that dissipate. You see, Honorable Deputy Speaker, the Western Cape has been great in managing this budget process. And thank you, Minister Mania, for doing what you can with the little you've been giving. Despite the fact that they dealt you a very bad hand, somehow you still find a miracle. And I would think the spec boom that you brought here last year, that is still growing inside this parliament. And that is what consistently show why we are the best government in this country. Moving forward, Honorable Deputy Speaker, I would honestly ask our members to stay safe, wear a mask. And Honorable Kleko, please don't organize rallies where people don't wear a mask, no social distance, and you spread the virus. And Honorable Nkondro, lastly on Honorable Nkondro, it is not the propaganda that brought us here. It is not the lack of income that brought us here. It is not the economy that brought us here. It is the ANC that brought us here. It is the ANC's bad policies that brought us here. And when you quote Nelson Mandela, frankly, Nelson Mandela was ahead of his time. And I think when all his quotes, if you read it properly, he's directing it to the ANC. Stop stealing, stop maladministration, stop implementing bad policies, look after the people, give the people hope. But that is not what your party is doing, Honorable Nkondla. We are the party of process and principles, and that's what we will consistently do where we govern this province, and we'll do so well. Please stay safe, wear a mask, and adhere to safety regulations. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I now recognise Honourable Minister Mania.
Deputy Speaker. Point of order.
Honourable Minister, if you can just take your seat. There is a point of order. I recognise the Honourable Chief Whip.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It seems the Honourable Minister of Finance does not have his microphone on.
Thank you very much for alerting me. I will ask him to start again. Thank you.
Let's start again.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I began by thanking the Honourable Ricardo Mackenzie for his spirited and robust response to the debate. And then I went on to say that I would nevertheless like to take this opportunity to respond particularly to the Leader of the Opposition, the Honourable Cameron Dugmore, but also to some other members who participated in the debate. Now, Deputy Speaker, on national conditional grants, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition makes a remarkable statement and says, I was silent on the matter. Well, let me quote from my speech during the medium-term budget policy statement where I said, and I'm now quoting myself, we have also received, wait for it, welcome national government funding to support jobs, safety and well-being in the Western Cape. Evidence, I would suggest, Honourable Mackenzie, that the Leader of the Opposition was once again listening with his mouth but not his ears. Deputy Speaker, on the whole question of alignment with national policy, again, the Leader of the Opposition makes a remarkable statement and says that we are not aligned with national government. Particularly, the evidence is on infrastructure. Well, honourable members, I'm sure you recall Premier Alan Wendy's special address, and I quote, this is the Premier, on the whole question of infrastructure, where the Leader of the Opposition suggests that we are not aligned. He says, as I have explained earlier, we have made the bold decision to invest heavily in infrastructure in the Western Cape in order to achieve our jobs priority. And he goes on to say, and so we have therefore taken a decision to explore, for the first time in the history of this province, the possibility of borrowing money from financial institutions to specifically invest in infrastructure that will enhance economic growth and job creation. Moreover, the medium-term budget policy statement contains a detailed statement on page 41 and page 42, setting out our new ambitious agenda on infrastructure. And yet, the Leader of the Opposition, the Honourable Cameron Dugmore, says that we are not aligned. Yet again, he must have been listening with his mouth, not his ears. We have also, as he knows, invested 155.4 million rand in the maintenance and repair of infrastructure, including infrastructure at schools, in order to support small businesses, which I thought that the Honourable Brett Heron would have supported as we shift spending from where we can spend to where we could not spend because of lockdown regulations in a way that supports small businesses, supports and saves jobs, and of course invests in existing infrastructure assets in the Western Cape. But no. On the whole question of economic inclusion, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, Cameron Dugmore, says that our plan is fatally flawed but he completely, of course, misses the fact that the 8.5 million rand allocated to the wine industry is allocated specifically to support 38 black-owned businesses and support 240 jobs. But talking, Deputy Speaker, about silence, the Leader of the Opposition said nothing about the fact that we are cutting the title deeds restoration grant, which does in fact transfer ownership to people without land. He said nothing about the fact that we are cutting that grant by 23.2 million rand to support the bailout of SAA. What did we hear from the Leader of the Opposition? Nothing. Silence. The Leader of the Opposition also has nothing to say about the fact that we are cutting R1 million from the Comprehensive Agricultural Support Grant to support black farmers. What did we hear from the Honourable Cameron Dugmore? Nothing. Silence. On the whole question of implementation, the Leader of the Opposition says there's no implementation plan. Well, I'd like to tell the Leader of the Opposition this is not national government. The plan is not the project. We are already implementing the plan. And had the Leader of the Opposition been listening with his ears and not his mouth, he would know that we are already supporting small businesses, 230 small businesses through the COVID support fund, which is set out on page 337 to page 385 of the budget books. Which brings me to the Leader of the Opposition's final statement, which is about support for the poor. Well, for the entire week, Honourable Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, Cameron Dugmore, has been huffing and puffing about what Premier Alan Winde allegedly said about SAA. Well, the truth is, the real truth is, and the real test is not what Premier Alan Winde said about SAA. The real question is what the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, Cameron Dugmore, is doing about the SAA. And the answer we all know is nothing. Silence. Nothing. Which we all know is wrong. He knows it's wrong, I know it's wrong, and he knows that I know it's wrong. It's simply an indictment. It's not just a political wrong. It is not just a failure of politics. It is in fact immoral to bail out a failing national zombie state-owned airline like South African Airways and cut spending to the poor, especially the poor in the Western Cape. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister. That brings us to the end of our speakers. That concludes the debate on the consideration of the principle of the bill. Are there any objections to the approval of the principle of the bill?
No.
No objections. There's an objection.
Honourable Dugmore, you objecting? Fine, we will then move on. A second.
I would have been disappointed if it didn't.
Thank you very much. Right, I have to announce there are currently 36 honourable members present and entitled to vote, and the House is therefore quorate. Honourable Dugmore, I see that smile on your face, but that does mean that we then have to vote. Those in favour, the question put before the House is that the principle of the bill be approved. Those in favour of the question put before the House, please say yes.
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 Those not in favour of the question put before the House, please say no.
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 I think the ayes have it quite clearly. The question approved.
Obviously.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will now ask the Secretary, give me a second, to read the bill.
Western Cape Second Adjustments Appropriation Bill.
Thank you. The House will deal with the separate votes from now onwards. The Secretary will read the second order of the day.
Consideration of report of the ad hoc committee on COVID-19 on its oversight and public participation activities undertaken during the period 14 April to 24 November 2020.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. I recognise the Honourable Wenger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Ad Hoc Committee on COVID-19 was established to conduct oversight over the executive in its management of the coronavirus pandemic. Today, we return to this House to discuss the work done by this parliamentary committee over the last 8 months. On the 31st of December 2019, the World Health Organization became aware of a viral pneumonia in Wuhan in the People's Republic of China. This disease is now globally known as COVID-19. The vast majority of people who have contracted this virus have recovered. A small number are experiencing lingering symptoms called long COVID, and many have tragically passed away from this virus. At the outset, we remember every person whose life has been taken by this disease, and those that are suffering its aftermath, which has changed our world and impacted every household across the world. As of today, globally, there have been 63.5 million confirmed cases, 1.5 million deaths, and 44 million recoveries. Deputy Speaker, on Thursday, the 5th of March 2020, the National Institute for Communicable Diseases confirmed the first COVID-19 case in South Africa. 10 days later, South Africa was in a declared state of disaster. A few days after the first case was announced, on the 11th of March, the National Minister of Health, Zweli Mkhize, announced the first laboratory-confirmed case of COVID-19 in the Western Cape. On the same day, the WHO declared the COVID-19 outbreak as a global pandemic. On the 15th of March, President Cyril Ramaphosa declared a national state of disaster to integrate and coordinate disaster management mechanisms to prevent and reduce the outbreak of COVID-19. And on the 23rd of March, announced that South Africa would be placed under a nationwide hard lockdown. This level 5 lockdown was in place between the 26th of March and the 30th of April. We all remember those difficult days of lockdown where South Africans were legally bound to stay at home. Our borders were closed, but our governments were open and working hard to beat the clock on getting health systems ready for what was to come. 2 weeks into this unprecedented hard lockdown, the Provincial Parliament was already at work. The pandemic and the nationwide lockdown proved to be a moment for us at the WCPP to step up and go virtual, setting new standards and leading the way in embracing technology with innovation and creativity. On the 14th of April, the Speaker of this House constituted the first Oversight Committee in South Africa to monitor, receive briefings, and engage government representatives on their response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Thus, the COVID-19 Ad Hoc Committee was born and continues to meet regularly as a recognized, constituted committee of the provincial legislature. The committee, consisting of 15 members appointed on a proportional basis, represents 6 out of 7 political parties represented in this parliament. The committee's first order of business was to devise 12 themes to center our work around, enabling us to concentrate on the areas impacting the lives of our residents: health responses and preparations, policing security and police brutality, food security, protection of the vulnerable, disaster management and local government oversight, economic recovery, support and livelihoods, transport and infrastructure, schooling and education, human settlements, citizen surveillance, intergovernmental relations and community cooperation, and finally, government finance and budgets. This structured approach has given the committee the necessary teeth to really unpack the impact of COVID-19 on the Western Cape, inviting and questioning some of the most important national and provincial departments, entities, and role players. The executive and top management of the Western Cape government came week after week to brief the committee and provided weekly reports so that, as public representatives, we were able to scrutinize the work of the government and ask some of the most pertinent questions. This mechanism continues to enable members to report back to their constituents across the length and breadth of our province. In this way, we truly live out the mandate to be a people's parliament. We looked into everything from provincial oxygen supplies to bereavement counselling to the informal economy. We checked that we had sufficient food supply from farms during the lockdown and why the price of eggs increased, to feeding schemes for children, the closure of ECD centres, the reopening of schools, the transport of healthcare workers, and the provision of PPE for nurses. We took on SASSA and the UIF for closed offices and the police for heavy-handedness. And we learned about how long COVID can survive on different surfaces and how the lockdown has reduced pollution levels. We were informed of the tens of thousands of daily calls to the Provincial call centre and the backlog of queries from a concerned and confused citizenry. We looked into livelihoods and economic recovery, disaster management, and if our phones were being monitored for track and trace. We interrogated testing, hospital bed numbers, and food parcels. We saw the building, the use and closure of the CTICC Hospital of Hope, and we interrogated budgets and how much all of this was costing. 3 state-of-the-art field hospitals were built, recognized by leading epidemiologists as success stories of effective leadership. We witnessed the Western Cape government living out its value of innovation, even in the midst of a crisis, such as the Diabetic Project, run by the Western Cape Department of Health. This groundbreaking project reduced the mortality rate amongst diabetics from 28% to just 4.5%. In addition, the Western Cape government, in conjunction with the City of Cape Town and other partners, has developed systems to monitor COVID outbreaks through screening wastewater. Speaker, using Microsoft Teams, the committee was open and accessible to all. The public, the media, and other interested stakeholders have been able to access virtual sittings of the ad hoc committee online and live streamed on YouTube. Times are changing, and the WCPP has stepped forward to join ranks as a world leader in virtual parliament. But Speaker, Deputy Speaker, we didn't just hear from government. No, we listened to the citizens of this province, and we spoke to survivors of COVID and their experiences of stigma and their care in the healthcare system. We heard from NGOs and the private sector to understand people's lived experiences, their frustrations, their fears, and their hopes. We asked members of the public to tell us what they thought of government's response. 17,000 people responded. As the Constitution of the Republic and the Western Cape ask of us, the Provincial Parliament facilitated public participation in the activities of this committee. We embarked upon a 3-pronged public participation program between the 22nd of July and 14th of October. The first public participation process was through a series of citizen engagements in the committee based on the themes that we had agreed upon at the outset. The citizen engagement program sought to include discussions with various stakeholders outside of government so that we could engage with the private sector and civil society organizations to gain a broader understanding of the subject matter. We heard from private hospital groups, hospital facility boards, NGO organizations assisting the elderly in care homes, and the Association for Persons with Disabilities. We heard from the Independent Schools Association and school governing bodies, from unions, various chambers of commerce, trade organizations, VinPro, and Agri-Western Cape. Second, we made a call for submissions from the public on their view of government's responses during the pandemic. This process was rolled out via a series of questions published on social media, through infographics and adverts published in mainstream newspapers and community media. Interested stakeholders were encouraged to submit their comments via an email address or on WhatsApp voice notes and messages. And the third stage of the public participation process was the public hearing held with civil society organizations and members of the public who addressed us and described their experience and how COVID has affected their lives and those of the stakeholders they represent. We found an overwhelming support for the wearing of masks, including some comments that those who were caught not wearing masks should face prosecution. We were told of long queues for SASSA grants and no social distancing in queues. The SASSA call centre did not answer calls. Allegations were made of UIF and TERS not being paid over to employees by employers. Concerns were raised around the fact that sanitizers were not always available on public transport, including the use of questionable sanitizing products. Many inputs received thought it unfair that taxis could operate at 100% while there were still restrictions on other gatherings and family visits. Stakeholders raised concern around the fact that school fees had to be paid while children were homeschooling. Some stakeholders noted that the distribution of PPE at schools was satisfactory and the majority of schools conformed to requirements of temperature checks, social distancing, and the wearing of masks. Stakeholders indicated their disappointment that parents were left without support for their childcare needs as ECD centres remained closed during the pandemic. Many concerns were also raised about the availability of food support. And as a prominent finding throughout this engagement, there were many comments about the disaster management regulations, which were seen as punitive, confusing or contradictory, and creating hardship. The Western Cape government, however, received accolades for the swiftness within which the healthcare facilities were upgraded in response to the pandemic. As the chairperson of this committee, I tried my utmost to follow the principles of impartiality and fairness, and to open up spaces for opposition parties. I would like to thank my colleagues on this committee from both sides of the benches for their robust participation in this oversight undertaking, and for the mostly cordial manner in which we work together. I'm sure I speak on behalf of all members by giving thanks to the procedural officers, Mr. Wasim Matthews for the first quarter, and Ms. Zaida Adams and Senior Procedural Officer Ms. Lizette Kuta for the full duration, for their outstanding efforts and hard work. We thank you. We express our deepest gratitude toward the thousands of healthcare workers, doctors, nurses, government officials and civil society members that worked and continue to work so hard to ensure our survival. And thank you to the Premier and the Provincial Cabinet for steering us through these troubled waters. Deputy Speaker, we are well aware that COVID-19 will be with us globally for a while still. At the same time, we are cognizant of our role to play as parliamentarians with a duty to oversee the work of government, especially at a pivotal moment in history as this. This is a concerted effort which requires a deep commitment to the values of constitutional democracy. It requires a willingness to become creative through technology and wisely use the resources we have at hand to demonstrate transparency to our residents. Our work as Parliament in response to COVID-19 is by no means done, and so we continue diligently in the public interest by tabling this report. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I now recognise Honourable Provincial. Is it Honourable Provincial? You heard me? Yes.
Yes.
Over to you.
Good
Thank you.
afternoon, Deputy Speaker, Premier, Leader of the Official Opposition, and Honourable Members. Speaker, far too little and way too late. This is the general feeling one gets reading this report. As a report had been superseded by the present upsurge of the killing pandemic that attacks us in the Western Cape through the back door and the front gate at the same time. The tragedy is that more people are dying daily and falling ill at an alarming rate while the virus blooms up dangerously. And the report was written under the impression that COVID-19 figures were decreasing. The report reflects on the province mothballing the emergency equipment and packing away the field hospitals. Deputy Speaker, and then even before this report is discussed, the complacent provincial government is sent back to the drawing board with COVID-19 hitting us again. Both the Southern Cape and Cape Town Metro are daily suffering serious mortalities. These are now hotspots again. Everything must be taken out of storage again. Feedback is that the public facilities in the Southern Cape, the province's second most populated area, cannot deal with the upwelling, and private hospitals also cannot handle the growing numbers. Patients die daily and healthcare workers are also under attack. Even doctors fell ill. In this dire time, Speaker, this report comes out painting a more rosier picture of the life reality. In fact, the report belies the truth. The province lets its guard down. That's the reality. Deputy Speaker, the field hospitals and emergency equipment need to be unpacked as soon as possible. The report romanticizes the renegade theory of a herd immunity, while this is discredited worldwide. In fact, the force and speed of the upsurge disproves the theory, and those who put high hopes on it to find a quick solution to the unknown virus. Another gap in the report is looking at the so-called second wave infections and referencing Europe. Iran-centric rap prevalence is notable, while Asia and other areas around the globe even suffer a third wave. Deputy Speaker, in fact, some readers remarks that the sanitized final report reflects mostly the DA position and sympathize more than anything else. The ANC will work to assist in this war against the unknown, where we built a ship while sailing it against the tempest. We need to plead with all residents to help to push this disease back. We have done so before. The ANC pleads with all to avoid crowded situations, to limit infections. Wash hands and sanitize hands regularly, wear masks and protection, observe healthy distance from others and avoid unneeded contact in general. Refrain from travel and drinking places or face harder lockdown. Let's all do this for our own sake and all those around us that we care about. Deputy Speaker, we cannot accept the report as it is and what it stands for. We will abstain from supporting it. The committee has its work cut out for it to deal with the upsets, conduct more critical oversight and hold the executive to strict account. We do not need more sweet out approaches. People are dying and they rely on us to also tighten measures on our side to help fight this battle. Deputy Speaker, we cannot let them down. We are elected to serve them, and especially the poor and vulnerable. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. I now recognise Honourable Makamba Botia.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Greetings to the Premier and all people observed. When a first case of COVID-19 pandemic was reported in the Western Cape, the first prevention mechanism should have been to quickly address the issue of people who lived in congested informal settlements. This is so due to the fact that the virus spreads through small droplets, especially when people are in close proximity to each other. So this meant that people who lived in small congested spaces would have a high risk of contracting the virus. However, it is shocking that out of the 500 informal settlements that were identified by government in the Western Cape, only 3 were chosen to dissatisfaction purposes. That is Danun, Kosovo, and Kailicha. Furthermore, even with these 3 chosen informal settlements, no real work has been done for purposes of desertification, if any of them. Instead of providing people in these areas with an open space of land and houses, we saw the DA-led Western Cape government cutting the budget intended for the provision of housing by more than 200 million. With this kind of gross negligence by the government that claims to have people's interest at heart and respect for their dignities, it comes as to no surprise that Kailicha and the Klipfontein sub-districts recorded the highest number of COVID-19 related deaths in the province. The government long neglected these areas, processes of informal settlement in these areas, and was now concerned on how they can best safeguard the spread of the virus amongst the white people who reside in the leafy suburbs. It is for those reasons that the very same DA government pushed for the quick easing of lockdown restrictions and the opening of businesses as their white friends from Stellenbosch were now losing profits. It is equally disappointing that this report is quite on the issue of illegal evictions that were carried by the DA government during lockdown. Deputy Speaker, the COVID-19 food relief packages, which were intended for the poorest of the poor, were utilized by the DA ward councillors and executive mayor for political ends and patronage. These food packages were delivered to those who do not need them as a thank you token for having voted for the DA in power. In those areas that the DA did not receive overwhelming votes, those poor people were denied these food relief packages as a punishment. Deputy Speaker, with regards to safety, the South African police services and the law enforcement was not only inefficient but useless. The fact that crime statistics were low during hard lockdown cannot be attributed to the work of the police, but rather to the citizens' disciplines as they listened to the call by the president to remain indoors. The police were hardly visible, especially in townships, even with the aid of the South African military. To this day, Deputy Speaker, they continue to remain invisible in townships such as Kailicha, where criminals are roaming the streets holding communities ransom by demanding the so-called protection fees. When police are called to respond to crime in townships, they respond by either saying they are short-staffed or they do not have enough vehicles or resources. However, they are called to protect a racist school in Provincial. They descended in the high numbers and all of a sudden have enough resources and use excessive violence against Black peaceful protesters. Deputy Speaker, police in this province are quick to respond, and when they are called in white suburbs by white people, in contrast, they are a no-show when they are called in townships by Black people. In protest against racism, the same police will appear on national television being assaulted and pushed by white racists, and they do nothing about it. But they will be quick to use excessive force against peaceful Black marchers who will only be singing. As EFF, we are tired of this kind of treatment, and our people cannot bear it anymore. I thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. I now recognise Honourable Heron.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, this Parliament can be proud of the work done by the Ad Hoc Committee on COVID-19. We thank the Speaker for establishing the committee, the Chairperson for the manner in which the committee was led, and all the members for the manner in which the committee exercised oversight. We must also thank Dr. Keith Clutie and his team at the Department of Health for their hard work and dedication, but also for his frank engagement with the committee. And we thank all those who came to the committee to brief us over the past 7 or 8 months. COVID-19 thrust the whole world into an unprecedented period of turmoil. Governments were compelled to make hard decisions about economic and social restrictions, and the pandemic brought out the worst and the best of political leadership. It exposed science skeptics and political opportunists. It tested community and society's solidarity. In the Western Cape, we saw remarkable responses of solidarity and care from so many people and communities. Shortly after lockdown was announced, over 200 community action networks sprung up in Cape Town to support those who were vulnerable, destitute, and hungry. Good people reaching into their pantries and their pockets to help those who were unable to do so. The people of this province were overwhelmingly kind, caring, and responsive, and we must thank them for that. Deputy Speaker, unfortunately, there were those who were unable to find empathy and care. In Mooley Point, a couple observed hunger and desperation from their flat window as lockdown hit the exceptionally marginalized people, those who live on the streets, hard. When the couple started to cook for the 100-odd street people living on the Atlantic seaboard, and to feed them from the boot of their car, they were harassed by some neighbors, by the Metro Police, and by a SAPS captain from the Sea Point Police Station. And when this intimidation didn't stop them from feeding the homeless people, their car was petrol bombed and totally destroyed. Deputy Speaker, it's difficult to comprehend the meanness and hate that leads to the bombing of a car because the owners are feeding hungry people. Of course, the people were hungry and still on the streets during the hard lockdown because the leadership of the city of Cape Town did not act out of empathy or care. They used the lockdown as an opportunity to clean up the streets, rounding up homeless people and transporting them to a concentration camp. They dumped over 1,500 homeless people on a cold, damp field in remote Strandfontein, where they were expected to live in marquee tents, sleeping several hundred people each. The people started to flee that camp from the day it was established. That camp lasted 6 weeks and cost the people of Cape Town 53 million rand. It was a massive failure of compassion and leadership. It was the worst of politics. The mean-spirited leadership of the city of Cape Town didn't end there. When the restrictions on informal trading were lifted by the Minister Cogta, it took the city 6 weeks to fully implement a permitting system, trapping micro traders in destitution, whilst the city leadership claimed it needed clarity on what the new regulations meant. This is another failure of leadership and care, the worst of political leadership. Deputy Speaker, 2 months ago, South Africa moved to the lowest level of restrictions, as we appear to have relatively successfully weathered the worst and avoided overwhelming our health systems. The early and hard lockdown is widely regarded as the right call and as having assisted our country from collapsing under the worst of possible scenarios. But not everybody thinks so, or not everybody says so. The leader of the DA, John Steenhuisen, said the only thing the lockdown achieved was the devastation of our economy. And he said whether we called it level 1, 2, or 3, or 6, it doesn't matter. It should not be there at all. And from early on, our Premier, his government, and DA members of this Parliament started calling for the complete lifting of all restrictions, prematurely and opportunistically. The DA used public fatigue as an opportunity to undermine the message from the National COVID Command Council. The DA was unable to resist the political opportunities the restrictions presented. And some DA leaders embraced and promoted herd immunity theories. Now, Deputy Speaker, our province faces a surge in infections, the so-called second wave, and our Premier and his government is looking to introduce local lockdowns. The DA and this government have consistently undermined the urgency and necessity of restrictions, challenging just about everything. And now as the Premier contemplates the need for a local lockdown to contain community transmission, the DA leader, John Steenhuisen, says there's no evidence it works. If the science says we must return to lockdowns, then we have no choice. But the DA, who must now implement a lockdown, have destroyed their own credibility on the issue. This is a culmination of unprincipled opportunism, conflicting messaging, and political expediency. We could have avoided the second wave if DA leadership had conducted themselves with responsibility and political maturity, and not tried to game the system for political purposes. This is the worst of political leadership. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Heron. I recognise Honourable Christians.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, firstly, I want to thank the chairperson for the non-partisan way that she chaired the committee, giving all parties, irrespective of size, the opportunity to address issues. And I want to commend her and all members. Members were well prepared, coming to these meetings, engaging the executive and other role players. And also, allow me also to say well done to the support staff for excellent work done. We had our work cut out for us, and the task was a difficult one, but we were up for the task. The establishment of this ad hoc committee by the Speaker in accordance to the Standing Rule 119(1)(b was an innovation for we as members to engage the executive on a regular basis, the executive and the police, national government, and all relevant role players. This committee was meaningful and insightful, helpful, because here as members, we could engage members of the executive and other role players with burning issues. On a regular basis, we were confronted by the public and we could address these issues almost immediately. I know as a province, we are richer because of the work done by this committee. We were also very encouraged by communities who had absolutely little to eat, sharing with those who had nothing to eat. It proved us that the people of South Africa, the people of the Western Cape showed that we care and that we can defeat this virus and conquer it going forward. I know, Deputy Speaker, that there were a lot of issues and a lot of stuff that we've discussed, and there's still work to be done because now of the second wave. But Deputy Speaker, it was a pleasure serving on this committee, and the ACDP support this report. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. Honourable Murray.
I just had to get my mic on. Speaker, today's World AIDS Day, and the Western Cape has a total of 452,210 people living with HIV. And now we are once again faced with another deadly pandemic, COVID-19. Speaker, as we speak, Mitchell's Plain has had a surge of COVID-19 cases from 88 to 251. Kailicha from 78 to 150 over the past 2 weeks. Tygerberg has 369 new COVID cases, and Klipfontein 205 within the past 7 days. Now, the ad hoc committee of the 24th of November has shown that COVID-19 has negatively impacted the livelihoods of thousands of limited individual freedoms and lifestyles, and high levels of unemployment has increased poverty. We therefore require, Speaker, an aggressive socio-economic health response strategy to this COVID-19 challenge. Now, our communication tagline says, stay safe, move forward. Really, what does this mean? Stay safe, move forward. It does not speak of any urgency, nor does it spell out the immense danger of this COVID virus. Speaker, neither does this message convey the urgency needed as a response for responsible behavior. It simply should be a key element in the fight against the spread of COVID. There are still too many people walking around with no mask, either out of arrogance or stupidity. They have marches with thousands of people without masks, not observing any social distancing. It's utterly stupid and a danger to society as a whole. I'm concerned, especially that the number of testing being done has decreased from 236 per 100,000 in October. It's down from 506 people that was tested per 100,000 in July. So we now have 236 per 100,000 tested as against double that almost in July 2020. We cannot allow this virus to continue living among us undetected. For as long as this virus continues to dominate our lives, the poor and the vulnerable, the abused women and children will suffer the most as a result of this increased gender-based violence occurs, fueled by lockdown regulations. Now, Speaker, law should regulate people's behavior. Non-compliance should have serious consequences for offenders, but there's no consequences for those who march in our streets without masks in their thousands. There's no consequences for nightclubs that don't observe these regulations. So what's the use of these regulations? Having declared a state of disaster on the 15th of March, empowering ministers to pass regulations without giving law agencies the necessary coercive powers to enforce compliance has made the state look indecisive and helpless in the face of calamity. We've been playing fiddle while Rome has been burning. The city of Cape Town should formulate bylaws to curb irresponsible nightlife behavior, and they should prescribe serious penalties for offenders. Non-compliance in wearing of masks and not observing social distancing has caused another spike of infections, while the state has got the appearance of a toothless bulldog. At the same time, total lockdown of businesses has virtually destroyed small, medium enterprises and caused thousands of job losses without halting the COVID-19 express train. Lockdowns and lockdowning our economy will lead to economic disaster and invite more criminal activities. We are now robbing trucks. We're burning our trucks. That's the only response Africa knows.
Thank you, Honourable
When
Maria.
they're mad, they destroy. When they're unhappy, they burn out, they break it down. The Western
Your time
Cape
is up.
as the best quarantine and capacitated province should have been given
Honourable Maria, your time is up.
in handling this pandemic. Thank you.
I wonder if you can hear me. Thank you. Thank
He
you.
usually has 2 minutes. He can't even finish in 5.
Honourable Maria, you didn't hear me, but your time was up. Thank you very much. Honourable van der Westhuizen.
Honourable Deputy Speaker, honourable members, many of you may be familiar with Ian Mitroff's book, published in 1998 with this title, Smart Thinking for Crazy Times. Mitroff explored the process of using critical thinking to ask the right questions and solve the right problems in any company or situation. The COVID-19 pandemic certainly led the world into crazy times and asked of us to respond by asking the right questions. To this effect, this House established the ad hoc COVID-19 Oversight Committee on the 14th of April 2020. While the ANC initially did not appreciate the importance of asking the right questions, I'm glad to say that they eventually participated. The establishment of a committee to oversee this government's response to crazy times, and whose report is serving before us today, was unique among the 9 legislatures. Unfortunately, a speech of 5 minutes cannot do justice to the important and wide-ranging work that this multi-party committee undertook. What happened in other provinces in the absence of similar ad hoc COVID oversight committees? In Gauteng, our biggest and best resourced province, and as confirmed by Premier David Makuru, their procurement was beset by corruption up to cabinet level. Even staff in President Ramaphosa's office was implicated by reports of irregular involvement in emergency procurement for personal protective equipment. Their smart thinking was directed on how to rob the public purse in this crazy times. The Nasrec Field Hospital in Gauteng opened late and without piped oxygen and proper equipment. And at a cost of 380 Rand per day, it only admitted 34 patients during the first 26 days of November. And this wastage of taxpayers' money is set to continue for at least 2 more months. This is an ANC provincial government's version of smart thinking in crazy times. In stark contrast to this, the ad hoc COVID-19 committee's report contains many examples of real smart thinking in the Western Cape. The Hospital of Hope was finished long before similar temporary facilities in any of the other provinces. And on opening day, it was fully kitted with piped oxygen and the necessary equipment. This is what can be achieved by smart thinking in crazy times. The report by the ad hoc COVID-19 committee also contains numerous other examples of innovation or smart thinking, varying from the publishing of the emergency procurement results, public transport solutions for health workers, the home delivery of chronic medicine, to plans to ensure the safe return of learners and educators to schools. An important aspect of the Western Cape's response was the cooperation and communication between provincial departments. The Western Cape soon added to its addressing of the risks of the infection plans to alleviate the enormous hardship caused by national regulations. While the report contains numerous favorable examples of this government's response, its task was not always made easy. Entities that one would expect to support humanitarian relief efforts were creating obstacles. An example of such a crazy action was the complaint laid by the Human Rights Commission with the South African Police Services against MEC Debbie Schaffer. This because she dared to alleviate malnutrition by reinstating the school feeding schemes. Crazy times and crazy responses indeed. The invitation by the Western Cape's ad hoc COVID-19 committee to the public to participate in its work and the vast number of submissions received from the public was in stark contrast to the work of the National Coronavirus Command Council. Never did this council invite the public to participate and provide input before announcing its far-reaching and often highly damaging regulations. It dismally lacked smart thinking for crazy times. The decisions of the National Coronavirus Command Council caused a humanitarian crisis. It seemed oblivious to the devastating effect that poverty has on lives. Its lack of smart thinking caused the courts, when approached by the DA and other concerned entities, to set aside many of its silly regulations. Unfortunately, often the damage was already done. It's during crazy times that evidence of real leadership and smart thinking is demonstrated. I foresee that this detailed report will become an important source of information for future studies of how this government responded with smart thinking in crazy times. I recommend that this House adopts the report. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. I now recognise the Honourable Minister, Dr. Ivan Meyer.
Deputy Speaker, I rise to take part in the debate on the ad hoc committee on COVID-19 of the Western Cape Parliament. I rise to present the Western Cape Cabinet's response to the ad hoc committee's report. I firstly want to express our thanks and appreciation to the chairperson of the ad hoc committee, our chief whip, Ms. Wengder, and all members of this committee. In the spirit of transparency, accountability, and openness, this government fully participated in the work of the COVID-19 ad hoc committee. The Western Cape government has followed an approach based on the values and principles of this government, and I will respond to the report of the ad hoc committee through the lenses of our values and principles. The first value of this government is caring. Right from the start, our approach was to care for the citizens of the Western Cape during this global pandemic. That is evident in the testimony of our government's responses to the ad hoc committee. The Premier led the caring campaign and he personally visited patients at the various sites together with members of his cabinet. The Minister of Social Development, Minister Fernandes, took charge of our humanitarian relief efforts as a sign of our approach to care for our citizens and the most vulnerable members of the community. The Minister of Local Government also allocated an additional 16 million rand to support the humanitarian relief efforts of municipalities across this province. Caring for our children and older persons were and still is central in our COVID-19 response. As per the report, the Western Cape Department of Social Development also issued guidelines and protocols for the prevention and management of COVID-19 infections in long-term care facilities. Madam Deputy Speaker, the second value of this government is competence, and we are seeing what a huge difference it makes in having competent people, staff and officials of this government in managing this pandemic. The competent manner in which the Premier, the Honourable Windy, and the Western Cape Minister of Health, Dr. Noma Frans Mbombo, managed this pandemic is truly remarkable and acknowledged by Minister Mikize, the National Minister of Health. As per the report of the ad hoc committee, the first incident of COVID-19 happened in the Western Cape on 11th of March 2020. The head of the department, Dr. Keith Klute, appeared before the ad hoc committee on Sunday, the 7th of June, and he briefed the committee. He's one of the most competent health managers in South Africa, and his excellent management of COVID-19 is evident. We've also seen the competence of the Director General, Dr. Harry Malila, all our heads of departments in the Western Cape, in the hotspot areas. It makes a huge difference. We have witnessed this competence at our weekly COVID-19 cabinet meetings also today. Competence helps when you are dealing with a pandemic of this nature. Madam Deputy Speaker, I was personally deployed to work in the Witzenberg and the Cape Winelands area. There I worked closely with Dr. Phillips, an equally competent and capable health team. To date, we are having a 91% recovery rate. This is the result of collaboration and working with competent people. Other ministers have reported the same level of competence in their various hotspot areas. The third value of this cabinet and this government is accountability. Various departments appeared before the ad hoc committee to account with honesty before the committee. Accountability also means to account for things that did not go well. We did, as reported to the ad hoc committee, experience some challenges with our national counterparts. In the spirit of accountability, the Provincial Treasury, led by the Minister of Finance, published a supply chain due diligence report on the purchasing of PPE. Given what is happening in the rest of the country, the Western Cape government has set a new standard of accountability, and we are encouraging all other provincial departments in South Africa to do the same. The Honourable Deputy Speaker and members of this House will note that the Provincial Treasury has again today published the 5th edition of the Procurement Disclosure Report. This report reveals that the Western Cape has spent to date 1.7 billion rand on COVID-19, thanks to the Minister of Finance. It is quite shocking how Ramaphosa's government failed the test of public accountability throughout this pandemic. As per the report, a testimony of the Provincial Treasury was very accountable and transparent about the fiscal impact of COVID-19 on the budget envelope of the Western Cape government. The Western Cape government is now calling on President Ramaphosa to account and make good on his promise. When he visited the Cape Town International Convention Center, he made a promise that this government will receive 5 billion rand to manage COVID-19 in the Western Cape. Madam Deputy Speaker, he has to date failed to deliver on this promise. The people of the Western Cape will hold him and his cabinet accountable for his failure to deliver on a public commitment that he made. Honourable Deputy Speaker, the next value, Honourable Deputy Speaker, the next value of this government is integrity. Political office bearers and officials that appeared before the ad hoc committee gave an honest account of our management of COVID-19. This government, led by Alan Winde, and his administration, led by Dr. Harry Malila and Dr. Keith Kloete, and all the HODs in this government are men and women of integrity, and confidence and trust levels have increased weekly in terms of the public opinion of how the Western Cape government manages the COVID-19 crisis.
Honourable Minister, if you can just take your seat, please. I see there's a point of order or raised hand. Honourable Sayed, what's your point of order?
Honourable Deputy Speaker, is the Honourable MEC willing to is Honourable MEC willing to take a question? Yes, is he willing to take a question on the denialism of the COVID-19 regulations by the Western Cape government, on the provincial government not wanting
Honourable Sayed, I'm waiting for the Minister to respond. Minister?
I don't respond to juniors.
The Minister's decided not to. Thank you very much. Honourable
Sayed. On the point of order, Deputy Speaker.
Honourable Sayed, what's your point of order?
On a point of order, Deputy Speaker, can the Minister not refer to fellow members of the House as juniors? That is ageism. We're not going to build a provincial... Deputy Speaker, can you hear me?
That's not a point of order. Thanks, Honourable Sayed.
Not going to build
let the Minister
governance with
complete.
ageism.
We've had a good session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Deputy Speaker. From the beginning, the Premier and his Cabinet resolved to establish a dashboard open to the public. We adopted a data-led and evidence governance approach in decision-making. Such an approach builds public confidence. Our data integrity was updated weekly, checked and verified daily. Because we are dealing with a global pandemic, last seen in 1918 with the Spanish flu, we needed to think outside the box. This government also adopted an innovation as a value of this government. During the appearance of the Health Department before the ad hoc committee, it testified that the innovative ways in managing COVID-19 in the Western Cape province. Dr. Kloete testified before the ad hoc committee that the COVID-19 daily dashboard has been nominated for an IP Innovation Award, and that you will find on page 21 of the report. As per the ad hoc report, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have seen how the using of high-flow nasal oxygen on COVID-19 patients ensured greater recoveries from the disease in place of ventilators. This innovation made all the difference in both high-care environments and acute environments. Honourable Deputy Speaker, the Transport and Public Works Department, as mentioned by Honourable Member van der Westhuizen, also used very effective the Red Door taxi mobility system to transport COVID-19 patients and PIU to and from quarantine and isolation facilities. This innovation made a big difference to avoid stigmatization in our communities. This service was launched with the taxi industry on the 18th of May 2020. Another very successful innovation, Honourable Deputy Speaker, was the COVID-19 Support Finder launched together with the City of Cape Town and Westgrove. This innovation assisted businesses to navigate and access the many support funds available to them. The last value of this government, Honourable Deputy Speaker, is responsiveness. Throughout the ad hoc committee's report, it became clear that the Western Cape government was very responsive to the requests and questions by the committee. The Premier held regular COVID-19 updates via digicons in line with the value of responsiveness. I want to thank the Premier, our Health Minister, Dr. Keith Klute, and the Director General for being very responsive in front of the committee, appearing on behalf of the Western Cape government. As you've seen in this report, every provincial minister and head of department have been allocated to hotspot areas. In all of these areas, they have been very responsive. This is in contrast to the national government. What we see in the report, very clearly, the national government was very missing in action in managing COVID-19. The Working Group 5 of the Ad hoc Committee has looked into government's response to COVID-19. As per the Ad hoc Committee's report, the national government has seriously failed the people of South Africa. I conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker. Lastly, Madam Deputy Speaker, the report gives an account of the Western Cape response, and we have led this pandemic through the values of caring, competence, accountability, integrity, innovation, and responsiveness. Lastly, this government wants to thank the citizens of the Western Cape, the NGOs, the community-based organizations, the faith-based organizations, members of this legislature for their support in managing COVID-19, as well as all the staff of this government and all the healthcare workers of this province. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister. I now recognise Honourable Wenger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to thank all the honourable members for their contributions to this debate on the Ad hoc Committee's report. Honourable Windvogel talks about little too late. Perhaps she wasn't paying attention when the Western Cape went through its first wave and the province managed to flatten the curve, prepare for the peak and get through it without being overwhelmed. What was too little or too late about that? But perhaps she was referring to the Eastern Cape, where it was thought dignified to transport sick patients in tuk-tuks and then bleed the taxpayer to the tune of 100,000 rand per bike and then backtrack saying that these are medicine transport vehicles. The honourable member astoundingly uses the word complacent. Complacent? That is the very last adjective that could possibly be used in relation to the Western Cape response. The government is relentless in its efforts, releasing daily statistical updates and consistent transparency. This is in stark contrast with Gauteng, which doesn't even know how many COVID cases it has. Leading statisticians are asking if Sesame Street's Count Von Count is doing Gauteng's numbers. Gauteng has lost control of its data and is currently harmonizing its data because it is reporting less COVID cases than it has COVID patients currently in hospital. Complacency, however, might be the word that could be used for the national government and other provinces when it comes to PPE procurement. As we've seen, the vast and disgusting corruption taking away taxpayers' money for service delivery to line pockets. Further, Deputy Speaker, I'm not sure which report Honourable Windvogel was reading, but our report does not make any mention of herd immunity, not one. And if the ANC had such objections to the report, why did they agree to adopt this report just last week? And also agreed with the previous monthly reports that make up the bulk of this report. Why the U-turn? The only answer I can get to is petty politics. I'd like to thank Minister Meyer for the government's response. To him and to all the ministers and HODs that contributed to this report through the many briefings and reports provided to us, thank you. I'd also like to thank the members that made constructive inputs today. It's clear that we have worked hard, many hours of preparation, which this report is testament to. It is also clear that every resource at our disposal has and must continue to be combined and concentrated to achieve safety for both our lives and our livelihoods. The pandemic has had widespread effects on every aspect of our lives, from our health to the education of our children, our businesses and our finances, our mental well-being, our futures, and government at all levels. South Africa is currently following the rest of the world in the trajectory of the virus and the second surge. And so as the Western Cape government continues in its efforts to manage this virus, so as the government continues to respond to this pandemic, so too will we continue to perform our oversight role over the government. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you very much, Honourable Wenger. That concludes the debate on this report. I have to announce that there are currently 35 honourable members present and entitled to vote, and the House is therefore quorate. The question put before the House is that the report of the Ad Hoc Committee on COVID-19 be adopted. Are there any objections to the report being adopted?
Yes.
No.
No. Yes.
I have an objection in the House.
No.
I have an objection in the House. Thank you very much.
Deputy Speaker.
In order for the members to have their respective votes on the above mentioned question, and that the report be recorded, that the report be recorded correctly, I will inquire from the Chief Whips to indicate their respective parties' positions on the question. So for political parties represented in the WCPP by no more than one member, I will then also inquire from the members of such parties whether any such members wish to record a vote different to the vote of their party. Will the Chief Whip of the DA please indicate whether the DA is in support of the approval of the question?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We support the approval of the report of the Ad Hoc Committee on COVID-19.
Thank you, Chief Whip. Are there any individual members of the DA who wish to record a vote different to the vote of their party? Will the Chief Whip of the ANC please indicate whether the ANC is in support of the approval of the question?
The ANC is not in support, Chair.
Are there any, thank you, are there any individual members of the ANC who wish to record a vote different for the vote to the vote of their party?
No.
Noted, thank you. Will the parliamentary leader of the EFF please indicate whether the EFF is in support of the approval of the question?
No, we are not in support.
Are there any individual members of the EFF who wish to record a vote that is different to the vote of their party? Noted, thank you. Will the honourable member of Good Party please indicate whether the Good Party is in support of the approval of the question?
Yes, Deputy Speaker, we will support it.
Noted, thank you. Will the honourable member of the ACDP please indicate whether the ACDP is in support of the approval of the question?
Yes, Madam Chair, Deputy Chair, the ACDP support the report.
Thank you, Honourable Christians. Will the honourable member of the Freedom Front Plus Party please indicate whether the Freedom Front Plus Party is in support of the approval of the question?
The Freedom Front is in support of the acceptance of the motion.
Thank you,
Madam Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Will the Honourable Member of Al-Jamar, Honourable Secretary, is he in the House? No, he's not. I'm going to leave Al-Jamar out. I just want to tally the supports, votes, and versus the not. Thank you very much. I have to announce that there are 24 ayes and 11 noes in support of the approval of the question. And as I said, 11 are opposed to the approval of the question. The question on the report of the Ad Hoc Committee has therefore been adopted. The names of the individual members present and their support or otherwise for the question before the House will be recorded in the minutes of the proceedings to ensure a full record of the voting on the consideration of the question. Please note, honourable members, before I adjourn, that on Wednesday, the 2nd of December and Thursday, the 3rd of December 2020, the proceedings will commence at 10 a.m., 10:00 hours. That concludes the business for the House, and the House is adjourned. The Secretary will now end the meeting, and all members will be exited from the meeting. I thank you.
Thank you.